Chapter 72. After Zhao Zongjian left, people came to him one after another to befriend him. After all, the name of sword god Zhou had spread like wildfire recently. Zhou Xuanji had no choice but to let a big and small heir protect him. His face looked fierce. Zhou Xuanji sighed, fame is a problem for humans, and obesity is a problem for pigs. Little Jiang Shui and Huang Lianxin heard him and burst out in laughter. Beishao Wangjian said, "Master, you have already entered the top 10 of Great Zhou's reputation ranking, but Great Zhou's hero ranking board did not record you. They might think that you are over 100 years old." Zhou Xuanji stared at him and said, "Nonsense, I'm only 11 years old." "Yes. 11 years old." Beishao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin were stunned. After spending so much time with Zhou Xuanji, it was easy to forget his age. After a while, Zhou Xuanji estimated that it was about time, so he ordered, "Beishao, bring a big and small heir to receive him." "Yes." Beishao Wangjian immediately leaped onto a big and flew toward the Xia sect. Now, the two dragon eagles were extremely fast. Even Beishao Wangjian, who was at the enlightening stage, could not match up to them. Little Jiang Shui walked up to him and asked, "Will he really be okay?" Zhou Xuanji waved his hand and said, "Xia Wuyo is only the disciple of the sword monarch. It's not that serious." Huang Lianxin nodded and said, "Although Xia Wuyo is the first disciple of the sword monarch, he is not the first disciple. The sword monarch's previous disciples all died for the Great Zhou Empire. This is why the Great Zhou Empire respects him so much." Zhou Xuanji sat on the ground and waited patiently. The little black snake laid on the three-eyed drought rodent's head and shouted, "I'm hungry." Smack! Zhou Xuanji slapped it away along with the three-eyed drought rodent. The three-eyed drought rodent's head was dizzy from the fall. After it woke up, it vented its anger on the little black snake. In an instant, the little black snake screamed in pain. After half an hour, two dragon eagles flew out from Swordsman City, followed by hundreds of Xia sect disciples. All of them were flying on their swords. The leader was Xia Wuyo. His face was filled with rage. He looked at Zhao Zongjian's silhouette in front of him and wanted to tear him into pieces. "Zhao Zongjian! Stop right there!" Xia Wuyo roared. As he spoke, he held the sword in his right hand and thrust it forward. The blade trembled, and dozens of sword chi visible to the naked eye shot toward the two dragon eagles. Zhao Zongjian stood on Little Fool's back, turned around and swept his sword horizontally, dispersing the sword chi. He gazed at Xia Wuyo and said, "Xia Wuyo, your Xia sect is too shameless. The so-called sword conference is just a joke. All of you hid the high-grade sword techniques of the Sword Firmament Pavilion. What a pleasant surprise." He deliberately circulated his spiritual power, and his voice resounded throughout Swordsman City, causing an uproar among the spectators. The Sword Pavilion hid a superior sword technique? Wait, the winner of the sword conference is Sword God Zhou. What's Zhao Zongjian's name? You don't know? Zhao Zongjian has already become Sword God Zhou's disciple. What? Xia sect is so shameless? If that's the case, who would participate in the sword conference? I fought with my life on the line, but in the end, I got ditched. Where's Sword God Zhou? Is he going to break up with Xia Zong? Cries of astonishment resounded in the city. Apparently, they were surprised by Xia sect's action. The sword conference had been going on for decades, but it was the first time such a scandal broke out. Xia Wuyo's face turned green in anger. His eyes were filled with rage and murderous intent. Soon, the two dragon eagles flew to Zhou Xuanji and the others. Zhou Xuanji waved his right hand. The Crimson Dragon Sword, Frost Wave Sword, Bloodbath Sword, Tiger Roar Sword, Wind Cutter Sword, Swine Culling Sword, Golden Rock Sword, Heaven Sound Sword, Hell King Sword, residual image sword, thunderclap sword, and formless sword levitated in front of him. The tips of the swords were all pointed at Xia Wuyo and the others. Xia Wuyo immediately stopped. Behind him, hundreds of Xia sect elders and disciples glared at him fiercely. All of them were furious. Although Zhao Congjian's fire did not burn down the entire sword library, it destroyed many ancient books on sword techniques. Zhou Xuanji stared at Xia Wuyo and said, "I hate people who set me up. I'm already being very kind by not burning down the entire sword library." Xia Wuyo's expression changed. "Our Xia sect did not set you up," he said with a deep voice. Zhou Xuanji snorted coldly and said with disdain, "Don't you know what's going on?" Seeing that the atmosphere was tense, little Jiang Shui, Huang Lianxin, and Beixiao Wangjian took out their enchanted artifacts and prepared for battle. Zhao Congjian landed beside Zhou Xuanji and prepared to fight alongside him. He liked Zhou Xuanji's temper. Never afraid. As a swordsman, one must ask one's heart. If one feels injustice, then draw his sword. Xia Wuyo stared at Zhou Xuanji fixedly and hesitated. Should I fight or not? Ha ha ha. The great Xia sect will become a laughingstock to the great Zhou by doing such a thing. A heroic voice came. Xiahou Jin flew over from the clouds. He was still wearing his mighty and heavy armor and had an exaggeratedly large blade in his hand. He quickly landed between Zhou Xuanji and the others and Xia sect. Seeing Xiahou Jin, Xia Wuyo's expression changed slightly. He quickly explained, "General Xia, our Xia sect did not do such a despicable thing." He spoke righteously, but some of the elders behind him blushed. Xiahou Jin ignored Xia Wuyo and said to Zhou Xuanji with a smile, "Brother Zhou, leave first. Xia Wuyo and I have not met for a long time and want to chat." Xia Wuyo wanted to say something but stopped. He understood that Xiahou Jin was giving him a way out. Zhou Xuanji was not stupid. If they really fought, they might not win. "How should I address you?" he asked. At this moment, he could not just turn around and leave. He still remembered this favor. He wasn't Long Outyan, who could do whatever he wanted with regards to dealing with people. "Xiahou Jin, if you want to participate in Great Zhou's heaven selection, you can look for me at the royal city's military camp," Xiahou Jin said with a smile. After that, he threw a military order to Zhou Xuanji. 2 words were carved on it, Xiahou. Zhou Xuanji received the order and was stunned. Are all great Zhou generals so straightforward? He shook his head with a smile and left with little Jiang Shui and the others. Xiahou Jin glanced at Zhao Congjian with a smile. If he could subdue Zhou Xuanji, he would get another Zhao Congjian. It would be a great return. After Zhou Xuanji and the others left, Xiahou Jin looked at Xia Wuyo and snorted, "Brother Xia, what's wrong with you? Suddenly short-sighted? This doesn't seem like the usual you." Xia Wuyo smiled awkwardly. He did not know how to answer and could only sigh. His relationship with Xiahou Jin was not simple. That was why he gave Xiahou Jin face. He sighed, "Maybe I'm really bewitched." Ever since he met Zhou Xuanji, he felt that he was not as calm as before. It could be because the Sword Monarch praised him, or it could be because Zhou Xuanji was too talented. But it was just a little. His heart was in a mess. On the other side, Zhou Xuanji and the others were already far away. Little Jiang Shui curled her lip and snorted, "That Xia Wuyo is such a hypocrite." It was Xia Wuyo who played tricks, but he still looked like he was slandered. Zhou Xuanji pinched her cheek and smiled, "Weren't you afraid that I would offend him?" Little Jiang Shui raised her chin and said matter-of-factly, "I was afraid, but he dared to mistreat you. I hate him and despise him." Humph. Chapter 73. After leaving Swordsman City, Zhou Xuanji and the rest walked toward the empire. They were not in a hurry but traveled as though they were on a sightseeing tour. Along the way, Zhou Xuanji was paying attention to how Zhao Congjian was teaching Northern Sword Valiant. He had been teaching little Jiang Shui since she was 2 years old. After that, he taught Northern Sword Valiant and Huang Lianxin for a few years. Among them, he even taught the sword noble Xiao Jinghong. So, he had a lot of teaching experience. With the foundation of the sword's way, he could always point out the problems in Zhao Congjian's teaching. Zhao Congjian was ashamed at first, but as time passed, he looked forward to Zhou Xuanji pointing out his problems. He even took the initiative to ask Zhou Xuanji after he taught him sword moves. Because Zhou Xuanji was teaching him too. He definitely knew the sword techniques that Zhao Congjian taught him. Zhou Xuanji's questions always benefited him greatly. This day, by the river, Zhou Xuanji was internalizing qi while little Jiang Shui washed his clothes. She was the one who washed his clothes. Huang Lianxin could not help even if she wanted to. Zhao Congjian stood in front of Northern Sword Valiant and watched him train. When Huang Lianxin walked past him, he could not help but ask, "Master, you don't even train with the sword?" This was his biggest doubt. After leaving Swordsman City, he had never seen Zhou Xuanji train with the sword. He only cared about internalizing qi. Huang Lianxin rolled her eyes at him and said unpleasantly, "Didn't you see back then in Swordsman City? With such talent, he still needs to train with the sword? To my master, the sword is a gift from the heavens." After that, she walked toward the 2 dragon eagles and prepared to feed them. Zhao Congjian was silent. At this moment, he suddenly heard a crisp sound. It came from his chest. It was heartbreak. He took a deep breath and took out his sword to train with Northern Sword Valiant. But why did he feel so bitter when he was training with the sword? After little Jiang Shui hung the clothes, she squatted down in front of Zhou Xuanji. The hair in front of her forehead was wet and twisted together. Her sleeves were rolled up, and her snow-white forearms looked extremely smooth. She squatted down and stared at Zhou Xuanji, blinking her eyes. "Why are you looking at me?" Zhou Xuanji, who had his eyes closed, asked. His tone was just as doting as before. She asked softly, "Are we really going to Great Zhou's heaven selection?" She hesitated for a long time, but still couldn't help but ask quietly. With Zhou Xuanji's personality, if he could defeat Xia Wuyo, he would have done so long ago. If he couldn't even handle Xia Wuyo, how could he fight the Empress of Great Zhou? She was also afraid of hurting Zhou Xuanji's pride, so she endured it for a month. At the same time, she felt a little guilty. If she was powerful enough, she could avenge her brother. Zhou Xuanji looked at her and asked with a smile, "You don't want me to go?" Little Jiang Shui hesitated and did not know what to say. "Then I won't go," Zhou Xuanji said as he shrugged his shoulders and smiled. Little Jiang Shui opened her eyes wide and looked at Zhou Xuanji in disbelief. Zhou Xuanji said, "No matter how great the hatred is, it's not as important as the person in front of me." In fact, he was also thinking about this problem. Previously, he had no idea how powerful the existences above the inner pellet realm were. After all, he had yet to truly encounter a stronger existence. One had to know that there were countless spirit spring and nascent soul realm cultivators by the Empress side. There were even leaving aperture realm cultivators. Xia Wuyo was only at the spirit spring stage and was able to force them to retreat. If he went to the Great Zhou Palace, he might not even be able to defeat the Empress. As the Empress of Great Zhou, her cultivation was very high as well. Little Jiang Shui blushed a little and said, "Are you always so obedient?" "Yes." Zhou Xuanji winked at her, but in his heart, he was thinking of another way. In another 10 years, he would definitely be more powerful, but the Empress would not remain the same. He still had to find an opportunity. Little Jiang Shui got up and bent down to pat his head. She giggled and said, "Good boy." Zhou Xuanji stared at her and said, "There's someone behind me. Give me face." After that, he got up and moved away from little Jiang Shui. In another 2 years, he would not be able to call her little Jiang Shui anymore. Looking at the grown-up little Jiang Shui, Zhou Xuanji sighed inexplicably. In both his previous and current lives, other than his parents, she was the one who had spent the most time with him. He turned to look at the others and clapped his hands, saying, "All of you, come here." Having heard him, Beixiao Wangjian and Zhao Congjian sheathed their swords and walked over. Huang Lianxin did the same. Even the three-eyed drought rodent ran over with the little black snake. Zhou Xuanji gestured for them to sit on the soft grass. "I think we need to change our plan. Does anyone know what the Empress has been up to recently?" Zhou Xuanji said straightforwardly. He did not feel humiliated or embarrassed. What was more important than his life? Beixiao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin heard him and heaved a sigh of relief in their hearts. They also felt that it was too dangerous for Zhou Xuanji to come into contact with the Empress. But in their eyes, Zhou Xuanji had always been unfathomable and could create miracles. Moreover, with Zhou Xuanji's prestige, they dared not to mention it. Beixiao Wangjian shook his head and said, "We can't hear news from the royal city in Swordsman City." Zhao Congjian squinted his eyes and said, "I know that the Empress is preparing to go to Merciful Melody Cliff in the next few years." Sword God Zhou wanted to kill the Empress? This is crazy. Not only did he not feel that it was ridiculous, but he felt an indescribable excitement. Zhou Xuanji dared to mention this in front of him because he could tell that he was not interested in the royal court. Many officials and generals of Great Zhou, including the royal family, invited him, but he rejected them all. Merciful Melody Cliff. Zhou Xuanji rubbed his chin and fell into deep thought. In the northern wilderness region, there were many transcendent sects and sanctums that were on equal footing with the empires. Merciful Melody Cliff was one of them. Back then, the Empress of Great Zhou studied at Merciful Melody Cliff. After her cultivation reached great accomplishment, she left the mountain to assist Emperor Yan of Zhou. In the end, one of them became the Emperor of Great Zhou, while the other became the Empress. It became a beautiful story. This might be his chance. But the Empress would surely bring many powerful cultivators with her. Whenever he thought of Lady Zhao Xian, he felt terrible again. His greatest hope was to avenge Lady Zhao Xian before the world forgot her. It was a pity that he did not lack potential, but he lacked time. Do you know where is suitable for cultivation? Zhou Xuanji looked up and asked. He was prepared to focus on his cultivation and wait for the Empress to leave Great Zhou. Zhao Congjian replied, "Within Great Zhou, there are countless blessed lands, but there are very few places that people can enter and leave freely. We can go to Immortal Sundering Mountain. This year's heaven selection will be held there too." Zhou Xuanji asked curiously, "Which means, we might meet someone from Great Zhou's heaven selection at Immortal Sundering Mountain?" Zhao Congjian nodded and said, "This is also one of the assessment missions for Great Zhou's heaven selection. The participants' enemies can ambush them here. Unless someone beyond Soul Fountain intervenes, Great Zhou will not interfere." Zhou Xuanji immediately slapped his thigh and said, "Let's go to Immortal Sundering Mountain then." If he could meet Emperor Yan of Zhou at Immortal Sundering Mountain, his other plan could be implemented. Of course, the most important thing was to cultivate. He would cultivate wholeheartedly. A legendary sword every year. When I reach the maximum level, I will barge into the Great Zhou Royal Palace directly. I don't need to beat around the bush. Chapter 74. It was 30,000 miles from Swordsman City to Immortal Sundering Mountain. Zhou Xuanji and the others took half a month to arrive. Looking at the undulating mountains and forests in front of him, the little black snake sighed and said, "Back then, I had also cultivated here for 200 years. Then, I was discovered by Li Qimei. From then on, I followed him on the wrong path and ended up like this. The group ignored it and continued forward. Zhou Xuanji clicked his tongue in amazement and said, "The spiritual qi here is indeed dense. There should be many demons here, right?" Zhao Congjian nodded and said, "After all, the Sundering Immortal Mountain Range is one of the best mountain ranges in the Zhou dynasty. There are many places that few people know about. Naturally, there are countless beasts inside." Little Jiang Shui asked curiously, "Why are there so many demonic beasts? Is it because there are many powerful demon kings hidden inside? The great Zhou can't do anything to them?" Zhou Xuanji rolled his eyes at her and said, "Of course, in captivity. To humans, every part of a demon's body is a treasure." As they chatted, they walked into the forest. The broken immortal mountain range was full of flowers and trees. Birds were chirping and flowers were fragrant. The three-eyed drought rodent seemed very excited. It dragged the little black snake and ran forward. Big and Little too followed closely behind. Their huge bodies caused a cloud of dust to rise as they charged about, and the trees along the way were toppled. "Let's go take a look. There might be treasures." Zhou Xuanji instructed Northern Sword Valiant, and Northern Sword Valiant immediately gave chase. The three-eyed drought rodent was said to know all the treasures in the world. In the past, it often found many treasures for Zhou Xuanji, but most of them were spirit stones or spirit herbs or spirit fruits. Zhou Xuanji, Little Jiang Shui, Huang Lianxin, and Zhao Congjian moved forward slowly. Along the way, Zhao Congjian started asking about the difficulties of practicing the vibrant raindrop sword. Zhou Xuanji had already mastered the sword will and had mastered the vibrant raindrop sword, so he could answer his questions with just a few words. Now, Zhao Congjian had completely given in. Following Zhou Xuanji, his way of the sword had been improving. However, what he wanted to learn the most was the dual sword intent. Before teaching Beixiao Wang's sword to a high level, he did not have the face to make such a request. An hour later, with Big and Small Air leading the way, they found Northern Valiant Sword and the three-eyed drought rodent. This was a cave located at the foot of the mountain. It was hidden by bushes and seemed bottomless. Beixiao Wangjian stood at the entrance of the cave and said, "The demonic beasts inside have been dealt with. Do you want to go down and take a look?" Zhou Xuanji nodded and led Little Jiang Shui into the cave. Zhao Congjian and Huang Lianxin followed closely behind. Big and Small Air were too big, so they could only wait outside. The tunnel led downward, and the walls were slightly damp. After walking for about 50 meters, they saw a very spacious underground space. The walls were inlaid with all kinds of gems, and the light they emitted illuminated the cave. Not far away, there were 4 corpses of demonic beasts. They looked like crocodiles and were drenched in blood. Zhou Xuanji's gaze fell on a lake in front of him. At the center of the lake, there was a blood lotus that was glowing with a faint luster. One look and anyone could tell that it was not an ordinary item. Blood jade lotus, this is a good thing. It can strengthen your qi and blood. If I consume it, I will be able to recover my cultivation base to the 2nd level. When the time comes, I will be able to help you." The little black snake laid on Zhou Xuanji's shoulder and said politely. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, "Congjian, go get it." "Yes." Zhao Congjian immediately walked over. The little black snake was overjoyed. "I'm going to become stronger." Finally, he didn't need to be oppressed by this stinky rat. "Are there any hidden dangers here?" Zhou Xuanji asked Huang Lianxin. Huang Lianxin's ability to see through things had been evolving. Not only could she see through the human body, but she could also see through mountains, murky rivers, flowers, and trees. Zhao Congjian once suspected that her eyes contained some kind of bloodline. But it was a pity that Huang Lianxin was not sure herself. Huang Lianxin's eyes sparkled with a strange light. She looked around and shook her head, saying, "There's no danger." When little Jiang Shui heard this, she felt relieved and walked towards a beautiful and dazzling blue crystal. Zhao Congjian quickly brought the blood jade lotus to Zhou Xuanji. The blood jade lotus was huge. It had 8 petals, and each petal was the size of a human palm. Zhou Xuanji took over the blood jade lotus and asked the little black snake, "Do you want to eat it raw?" The little black snake nodded excitedly and said, "My body is small, I have to eat it slowly." Smack! Zhou Xuanji slapped it away, along with the 3-eyed drought rodent. He tore off a petal and began to chew. In an instant, he felt a stream of heat flowing down his throat and coursing through his meridians. He immediately sat down and began to channel his energy. The little black snake was in a daze from the fall and shouted in a flustered and exasperated manner, "This old man cannot coexist with you." What responded was the 3-eyed drought rodent's butt. Zhou Xuanji channeled the sword chi golden body incantation and cultivated on his own, while the others dug out the spirit stone crystals embedded in the walls. After they finished harvesting, Zhou Xuanji was still not done, so they decided to stay here for a while. Beixiao Wangjian and Zhao Congjian walked out of the cave and cleared out an empty space to continue their sword training. Time passed. 7 days passed. Zhou Xuanji ate 2 blood jade lotus petals and finally broke through to enlightening level 4. His sword chi golden body incantation reached level 3, sword chi soar. Previously, he was already halfway into sword chi soar. This time, he completely stepped into it, and the spirit energy in his body grew tremendously. The so-called sword chi soar was to use the pores of the skin as the clouds, and the sword chi would burst out. If the enemies were close, they would be killed by the sword chi and shredded into pieces. After breaking through to sword chi soar, he was in a good mood. He gave 2 blood jade lotus petals to little Jiang Shui, 1 each to Beixiao Wangjian, Huang Lianxin, and Zhao Congjian. He tore off half of the remaining petal and threw it to the 3-eyed drought rodent. He kept the other half for himself. Little Jiang Shui suggested that she give her petal to big and small heir. Although Zhou Xuanji rejected, he could not stand her coaxing and pestering. After that, the group packed up and continued their journey. They planned to head deeper into the immortal Sundering Mountain. The deeper they went, the richer the spiritual chi. After traveling for a month, they finally stopped. During this period of time, they encountered many demons and even cultivators, but they did not interact with any of them. The place they chose to settle down was the top of a mountain. There was an old tree that was 30 meters tall. The trunk of the tree needed 8 adult men to wrap their arms around it. The cliff was more than 300 meters tall. Below it was a boundless forest. Looking from here, they could see very far. Zhou Xuanji began to cultivate crazily. Not only did he internalize qi, but he also used spirit stones and spirit pills. 3 months later, he forcefully broke through to enlightening level 5. Little Jiang Shui and Huang Lianxin also broke through to foundation building level 6. Another few months passed. Zhou Xuanji continued to break through and reached enlightening level 6. Under Zhao Congjian's guidance, Beixiao Wangjian achieved small accomplishment in his sword technique. It was a black-grade advanced tier sword technique after all. To achieve great accomplishment required time and effort. Zhao Congjian's vibrant raindrops sword also reached small accomplishment. During the day, he trained with his sword and occasionally gave Beixiao Wangjian some pointers. At night, he internalized qi and cultivated. The others did the same. They cultivated spells or sword techniques during the day and internalized qi at night. Only Zhou Xuanji internalized qi from morning to night. He could even sit for 7 days and 7 nights without moving. This day, The sword spirit's voice resounded in Zhou Xuanji's mind, analyzed that the sword owner has reached 12 years old. Gotcha started. Ding! Congratulations, the sword owner obtained. Chapter 75. Ding! Congratulations, the sword owner has obtained, gold, furious ape sword, bronze, chicken slaying sword. Zhou Xuanji was stunned. 2 legendary swords? What was going on? Wasn't he only allowed to draw once? Every year the sword master grows older, he must draw a divine sword. At the same time, there is a chance to draw other things, including divine swords. The sword spirit quickly explained, which enlightened Zhou Xuanji. What if one day, his mortal rank exploded and he directly drew dozens of divine swords? If that was the case, then his 100-sword style would be realized. He took out the Furious Ape Sword and Chicken Slaying Sword. The Furious Ape Sword was a gold-rank divine sword, so it must be very powerful. As for the Chicken Slaying Sword, this name, ahem. At this moment, a few lines of small words that only he could see appeared before his eyes. Sword name, Furious Ape Sword level, gold, description, a divine sword formed from the bones of the ancient angry ape. By injecting spiritual energy or magic power into it, it can unleash sword chi. The longer it takes to accumulate power, the stronger the sword chi will be. Special warning, there is no time limit for accumulating power. Sword name, Chicken Slaying Sword level, bronze, description, specialized in killing chickens, born to kill chickens. When Zhou Xuanji saw the description of the Furious Ape Sword, his eyes brightened. This feature was awesome. Charging up to slash sword chi, and there was no time limit. Wouldn't it be infinitely powerful? But when he saw the Chicken Slaying Sword's description, he was speechless. He already had a swine-culling sword, and now he had another sword that specialized in killing chickens? Was there a special meaning behind the term, chicken? Zhou Xuanji thought as he focused on the 2 swords in his hands. The Furious Ape Sword was a black sword with a lot of black ape fur on its hilt. It was very comfortable to touch. The blade was 4 fingers wide and 1 meter long. There was a small angry ape's head at the point where the hilt and the blade were connected. It looked very sinister and terrifying. The Chicken Slaying Sword appeared simple and unremarkable. If it was placed in a weapon shop, no one would notice it. It was just an ordinary silver sword that was slightly longer than the Furious Ape Sword. It was actually used to chop chickens. Good sword. Zhao Congjian, who was not far away, praised. His eyes were burning with passion. As a swordsman, he had a keen eye for swords. Zhou Xuanji stored the Furious Ape Sword and held the Chicken Slaying Sword in his hand. Let's spar. He asked with a smile. Zhao Congjian looked at the Chicken Slaying Sword and shook his head. This sword is all right, but it's far from that sword. Why don't you use that sword to spar with me? Zhou Xuanji shook his sword and said with a smile, this is the Chicken Slaying Sword, don't underestimate it. As he finished speaking, he dashed towards Zhao Congjian with the vibrant raindrop sword. Zhao Congjian's eyes brightened. He immediately understood that Zhou Xuanji wanted to teach him some sword techniques. He immediately used the vibrant raindrop sword to resist Zhou Xuanji. The 2 swords clashed, and Zhou Xuanji directly suppressed him. In terms of spirit energy, Zhou Xuanji was no match for him. But Zhou Xuanji was a dual cultivator of energy and physique. After he broke through to the 3rd level of the Sword Chi Golden Body incantation, Sword Chi Soar, his power increased tremendously. Together with the fact that his sword was faster than Zhao Congjian's, Zhao Congjian was naturally at a disadvantage. In the distance, little Jiang Shui and Huang Lianxin were chatting at the edge of the cliff. Master is 12 years old today. Aren't you already 16? Time passes so quickly. It's time for the little girl to get married. Huang Lianxin sighed in amazement. She was only in her 20s, which was the prime of a woman's life. She wore a long dress the color of a green lotus and had 2 hairpins in her hair bun. Together with her pretty face, she could charm most men. Although little Jiang Shui looked young beside her, her looks were more exquisite. Her eyes were bright, and she wore a golden thorn inner armor with a layer of blue clothes and a white long robe. She wore a jade phoenix evil destroyer hairpin on her head. She already had the looks and temperament that could cause the downfall of a city. Hearing Huang Lianxin's words, she blushed and mumbled, "I'm not getting married." Young girls were always full of anticipation and shyness toward love. Huang Lianxin smiled faintly and said, "Are you waiting for master to grow up?" In their eyes, Zhou Xuanji was the reincarnation of an ancient powerhouse, so they had never treated him as a child. Huang Lianxin had already seen through little Jiang Shui's thoughts, but Zhou Xuanji did not. This guy was really a cultivation maniac. Usually, he only talked about cultivation. Little Jiang Shui lowered her head. Even her ears were red. Every time this happened, she would think back to the day when she first met Zhou Xuanji. That day, when she was bullied and returned to her room, Zhou Xuanji was lying on the bed. "Sister, I'm thirsty," he called out to her. She would never forget that scene for the rest of her life. She raised her head and asked with a blushing face, "Sister Lianxin, do you have someone you like?" Huang Lianxin was a little stunned. She shook her head and laughed, saying, "All I think about is revenge. I have already given up on love." Little Jiang Shui blinked and said, "Then you don't know what love is either." Huang Lianxin heard her and blushed. She faked a cough and said, "Of course I know. What is love? To hold hands and never be separated. To have each other in your heart. That is love." "Really?" The 2 girls began to discuss love. To prove that she understood love, Huang Lianxin began to tell little Jiang Shui about the love legends in the northern wilderness region. On the other side, Northern Valiant Sword's attention was attracted by Zhou Xuanji and Zhao Zongjian's spar. He had a weird expression and mumbled, "Master's sword. Why does it always stab downward?" Zhou Xuanji was astonished in his heart too. Why did his chicken-slaying sword always stab downward? Zhao Zongjian's face turned red. With the vibrant raindrop sword, he really could not withstand Zhou Xuanji's attacks. He wanted to use other sword techniques, but the pride in his heart did not allow him to. At this moment, Zhou Xuanji kept his sword and stood up straight. He faked a cough and said, "Let's stop here. Do you know where you are lacking?" Zhao Zongjian took a deep breath and cupped his fist at Zhou Xuanji in shame. He turned around and left immediately. He planned to practice the vibrant raindrops sword throughout the night. Zhou Xuanji turned around to look at Northern Valiant Sword and slowly raised the chicken-slaying sword. Northern Valiant Sword shuddered. He felt a gust of cold wind drilling between his legs, and he immediately escaped. Zhou Xuanji looked at the chicken-slaying sword in his hand and sighed in amazement, "It's really the chicken-slaying sword." After that, he stored the legendary sword into the supreme storage. He turned around and walked toward little Jiang Shui. He wanted to hear what the 2 girls were talking about. His hearing was outstanding, so he could hear their conversation before he even got close. "So they are telling a story." Zhou Xuanji smiled. He quickly sat down beside little Jiang Shui and asked with a smile, "What story are you 2 telling?" Little Jiang Shui hugged his shoulder and giggled, "You tell me. Sister Lianxin's stories are not good at all. The endings are too tragic." Huang Lianxin mumbled, "Master knows about love stories. He can only tell you stories about the rise of powerful cultivators." Zhou Xuanji stared at her and said, "Who says I don't know? I know so many stories that you will be scared to death." Yeah. You tell me a beautiful love story." Little Jiang Shui nodded with a smile and urged him. Since she was young, she often listened to Zhou Xuanji's stories. Zhou Xuanji could always tell her different and interesting stories. Listen up. I will tell you a beautiful love story that will touch the hearts of all ages. Zhou Xuanji slapped away little Jiang Shui's hand that was on his shoulder and began to tell the story. Legend has it that there was a powerful god in the sky. His name was Marshal Tianping, and he led 100,000 heavenly river navy soldiers. He was majestic and awe-inspiring, and he awed the three realms. After that, he made a mistake while drinking and was banished to the mortal realm. He was turned into a pig, and when he was young, he was almost killed. Fortunately, a little girl could not bear to see him like that, so she asked her parents to buy him and let him go. Marshal Tianping began to cultivate in the wild. After that, he became a demon king and returned in human form to search for the little girl who saved his life. But hundreds of years passed, and the world changed. The little girl reincarnated and was born in a wealthy family called Gao Lao Village. The first update of the night, I updated Zhou Xuanji's attributes in the forum. There will be more content announced in advance. You can go and take a look. Chapter 76. Zhou Xuanji narrated Canopy Marshal's story. His voice was not soft, and even Zhao Congjian and Beishao Wangjian, who were far away, were listening. Heaven Realm? Canopy Marshal? 100,000 heavenly river navy? Why hadn't they heard of such a legend? Hearing Zhou Xuanji speak as if it was the truth, they almost believed him. As the story progressed, the evil monk Tang Xuanzang brought his demonic disciple, Sun Wukong, to separate the Canopy Marshal and Lady Gao, who had finally gotten together. Little Jiang Shui and little Jiang Shui's tears fell as they listened to the story. In order to let Miss Gao live forever and accompany him forever, the Canopy Marshal bade farewell to Miss Gao and was given the name Zhu Beiji by Tang Xuanzang, with the courtesy name Wuneng. He became Tang Xuanzang's servant and went with him to the Western Paradise to obtain scriptures. Zhou Xuanji told the ending of the story, and he even sighed. He could not describe the joys and sorrows of parting and reuniting, nor the feelings of love. The two women were already sobbing uncontrollably. Zhao Congjian sighed in a low voice, "What a great Marshal Tianping. He knows when to yield and when to stand tall. He's a hero." Northern Valiant Sword was also at a loss as he thought of her. Heroes always fall for the charms of a beautiful woman. Little Jiang Shui wiped the tears off her face. Her eyes were red and swollen. She grabbed Zhou Xuanji's arm and asked, "What happened after that? Did Canopy Marshal reunite with Miss Gao?" Huang Lianxin also looked at Zhou Xuanji, hoping that Canopy Marshal would have a good ending. If such a sentimental hero could not get what he wanted, how many lifetimes would he have to search for Miss Gao? Zhou Xuanji got up and looked into the distance. He went to the Western Paradise and became a pure altar emissary under Buddha. He could never see Miss Gao again, and Miss Gao could not withstand the mercilessness of time. She turned into dust and disappeared with the wind. Everyone in the world praises immortals and Buddhas, but who can escape from mortal emotions? Be it immortals or demons, they can't escape love. With that, he shook his head and left in a huff. Even he himself couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Now that he was acting, it was really smooth and natural, with a unique charm. Little Jiang Shui was stunned. She quickly got up and chased after Zhou Xuanji. She tilted her head and asked, "Will they really never meet again?" Her tone was low, which made Zhou Xuanji feel quite helpless. "Did I speak too well, or are you too soft-hearted? Stories belong to others. What you should be concerned about is how you write your own story." Zhou Xuanji patted her head and comforted her. Little Jiang Shui nodded and pouted, "Why do you sound so reasonable now? Have you grown up?" Zhou Xuanji almost collapsed in laughter. What did it mean to grow up? Little Jiang Shui hooked her arms around Zhou Xuanji's neck and pressed her forehead against his. She asked softly, "Tell me, do you have someone you like? You know so many stories, you must have matured early." Zhou Xuanji stared at her and wanted to break free, but the girl did not let go. He said helplessly, "I'm only 12 years old. How can I have a sweetheart? Young girls in the prime of their youth were just too troublesome. Thinking about nonsense all day long." Little Jiang Shui let go with satisfaction, and Zhou Xuanji quickly escaped. "Wait. He doesn't have a sweetheart?" Little Jiang Shui suddenly thought of something and her face darkened. It was a pity that Zhou Xuanji had already disappeared. For the next month, little Jiang Shui was sulking. Although she still washed his clothes and cooked for him, every time he talked to her, she would turn around with a cold snort and ignore him. Zhou Xuanji was amused. He knew exactly what little Jiang Shui was thinking. He just wanted to anger her. 5 months later, Zhou Xuanji broke through again and reached enlightening level 7. This day, Zhao Zongjian returned on his sword. He landed beside Zhou Xuanji, bowed, and said, "Master, Great Zhou's heaven selection has begun. There are 372 participants in the martial science exam. Their goal is to hunt down rank 4 demons, rank 5 demon kings, and rank 6 great demon kings." Zhou Xuanji opened his eyes and asked in astonishment, "They can only kill rank 3 demons?" Zhao Zongjian nodded and said, "If it's any lower, it wouldn't be in line with Great Zhou's heaven-chosen level. Great Zhou has sent a 2nd-rank general and 6 3rd-rank generals to guard and patrol. Among them is Xiahou Jin, who helped us that day." "Is Meng Tianlang here?" Zhou Xuanji asked. He did not feel guilty for standing Meng Tianlang up. After all, he did not owe Meng Tianlang anything. He had never used the General Meng token. "He's here," Zhao Zongjian said. Many princes and princesses came from the royal family, but the emperor and the empress did not come. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, "Ignore them. Let's continue our cultivation." Although Great Zhou's heaven selection was held at Immortal Sundering Mountain, Great Zhou did not clear out its participants. Even if the heaven chosen had conflicts with unrelated people or killed each other, they would not interfere. As long as one's cultivation did not exceed Soul Fountain, it would be a test. So, in every heaven selection, many failed participants came to look for trouble. This made Great Zhou extremely lively during Great Zhou's heaven selection. All kinds of news spread like wildfire. Zhao Zongjian nodded and walked under the tree to continue his sword practice. That day, after Huang Lianxin, Beishao Wangjian, a big and small heir returned, Zhou Xuanji gathered them and reminded them not to go out casually, in case something bad happened to them. No one objected. Little Jiang Shui asked, "Are we going to stay here? Not hide?" The top of the cliff was too conspicuous, and there would be trouble. Zhou Xuanji said with a smile, "There are so many geniuses. There might be someone suitable to be my sword slave." Everyone's eyes brightened, and they were all looking forward to it. Zhao Zongjian looked at Beishao Wangjian and said, "Go and practice your sword skills. If you don't succeed soon, there will be newcomers, and you will still be at the bottom." Beishao Wangjian was a little depressed. "Didn't I still have Huang Lianxin?" The first round of Great Zhou's heaven selection lasted for a year. 20 out of the 372 would enter Great Zhou's royal city, and the top 3 would be decided under the emperor's nose. The group continued to cultivate. They had already built 5 wooden huts under the tree, and they stored plenty of firewood and food. There was a small river at the foot of the mountain, and they could wash up. With their cultivation, they could jump into the river with their clothes on and use their magic energy to evaporate the water. They did not even need to take off their clothes. They could just change in the huts. The group began to cultivate day after day. After dinner every day, Zhou Xuanji would tell them stories. The stories were filled with logic, and even Zhao Congjian loved to listen to them. In the blink of an eye, another 2 months passed. This day, a genius finally came to Zhou Xuanji and the rest. I'm Long Yang Tian, ranked 26th on Great Zhou's hero ranking board. How about selling these 2 dragon eagles to me? A handsome young man came on a flying fan. He wore a green robe and had an extraordinary demeanor. He stared at a big and small air with a burning gaze. Zhou Xuanji and the rest laughed. Let me do it. Beishao Wangjian said excitedly. Huang Lianxin rolled her eyes at him and said, why don't you consider yourself? You want to die with your enlightening stage cultivation? Long Yang Tian saw that Huang Lianxin was beautiful and that she said such words. He immediately raised his chin and looked arrogant. Zhao Congjian got up slowly and looked at Long Yang Tian. I'm Zhao Congjian, ranked 9th on Great Zhou's hero ranking board. Since you are here, then stay. Long Yang Tian opened his eyes wide and was stunned. Chapter 77. 9th on the Great Zhou's reputation ranking? Zhao Congjian. Long Yang Tian widened his eyes in shock and his brain stopped working. He frowned and shouted, Zhao Congjian. How could this be? Aren't you the new disciple of the Sword Monarch? Why are you here? The Sword Monarch's disciple would not participate in Great Zhou's heaven selection. This was a strict order from the Sword Monarch. Zhao Congjian frowned when he heard that. Before he participated in the Xia sect's sword discourse, the news that he was the Sword Emperor's disciple had spread. However, he had never seen the Sword Emperor with his own eyes. The Sword Emperor had sent someone to see him and expressed his intention to take him in as a disciple, but he was too arrogant and had directly refused. But after that, the news of him being the Sword Emperor's disciple didn't stop, and it became even more intense. As time passed, everyone in the world thought that he was the Sword Emperor's disciple, causing him to be extremely disgusted with the Sword Emperor. Hearing Long Yang Tian mention this again, his eyes turned cold, and he suddenly leaped up with his sword. Zhao Congjian's speed was very fast. Before Long Yang Tian could escape, he was already close to him. Long Yang Tian leaped and the flying fan under his feet landed in his hands. He waved it at Zhao Congjian. Zhao Congjian shook his long sword and countless sword stars shot out, drowning Long Yang Tian. In an instant, Long Yang Tian's robes were cut open and blood splattered everywhere. Vibrant raindrops soared. Now, Zhao Congjian's sword technique was nearing completion. Even if it was still lacking, it was enough to defeat Long Yang Tian. Zhou Xuanji waved at Beishao Wangjian. When Beishao Wangjian walked up to him, he asked curiously, Zhao Congjian did not even reach Soul Fountain, why is he ranked 9th? Meng Tianlang and Xiao Jinghong were both at the Spirit Spring stage. The latter could kill 5th-rank demons and Spirit Spring experts like slaughtering chickens and dogs. Could it be that there was a dividing line within the Great Zhou's reputation list? Northern Sword Valiant smiled bitterly. The Zhou dynasty's reputation chart is a chart for those below 100 years old. Master, do you think everyone is like you, reaching the 7th level of the enlightening state at the age of 12? With Zhou Xuanji's pace, he might have broken through to Soul Fountain by the age of 20. Looking at him, Northern Sword Valiant could not help but sigh. Talent was really a cruel thing. Zhou Xuanji blinked and said, seems like our Great Zhou's talents are declining. Northern Sword Valiant, the battle between Zhao Congjian and Long Yang Tian continued. Long Yang Tian was no match for Zhao Congjian at all. In less than 100 rounds, he was defeated. In the end, he was thrown to the top of the cliff by Zhao Congjian. His storage ring and storage bag were all taken away. His face was filled with despair as he laid down like a corpse. Northern Sword Valiant asked, this person is one of the top 30 on the hero ranking board of Great Zhou. Is he qualified to be your sword slave? Sword slave? Long Yangtian shuddered and turned to look at Zhou Xuanji instinctively. A child? Wait a minute. Children. Two dragon eagles. Long Yangtian seemed to have thought of something, and his face turned horrified. He said with a trembling voice, unparalleled in the world. Sword God Zhou, at this moment, he wished for nothing more than to give himself a few slaps. He was too rash. Zhou Xuanji walked up to Long Yangtian and looked down at him. He doesn't know the sword. Let him go, he said with a frown. Long Yangtian was excited when he heard that. He struggled to get up and stammered, "Thank you, Senior God of Swords." Then, he carefully walked past the crowd and arrived at the cliff. Relying on his flying fan, he swayed and flew towards the horizon. Zhou Xuanji looked at Zhao Congjian and said, "Check the loot." Zhao Congjian nodded. Long Yangtian was just the beginning. Over the next few days, cultivators passed by this place. Most of them were attracted by the dragon eagles, Huang Lianxin, and little Jiang Shui. In the end, some died, while others were injured. Zhou Xuanji's wealth began to grow exponentially. Apart from cultivators, there were also demon kings passing by. Most of them were only at the 4th rank, barely able to take human form. In the blink of an eye. Another 3 months passed by. Zhao Congjian and Beixiao Wangjian had both mastered their sword techniques. The name of Sword God Zhou spread across the immortal Sundering Mountain range. All the chosen ones knew that Sword God Zhou brought Zhao Congjian along to cultivate at the immortal Sundering Mountain. Many sword cultivators began to search for Sword God Zhou. Even the unparalleled Zhao Congjian was willing to take Sword God Zhou as his master. How profound was Sword God Zhou's way of the sword? On this day, a young man in black flew past the cliff. He stopped abruptly and looked at the two dragon eagles before looking at Zhou Xuanji. The dragon eagle's cry pierces through the skies, "The unparalleled Sword God Zhou, the body of a dwarf, that's him." The black-clothed youth immediately became excited, and he immediately landed on top of the mountain. Zhao Congjian and Beixiao Wangjian turned around and looked at him coldly, as though they were looking at their prey. At this moment, the black-clothed youth knelt down on the ground with a loud thud. He held back his excitement and cried out, "Sir Sword God, please take me as your disciple." Although he was not handsome, the black mole on his left eyebrow made it easy for people to remember him. Take him as a disciple? The group was stunned and could not understand the situation. Zhou Xuanji looked at him and asked, "Tell me your name." The black-clothed youth said, "My name is Fang Junsheng, ranked 19th on Great Zhou's hero ranking board. I have long heard of Sir Sword God's decisiveness in the way of the sword. Dual sword wills and 9 sword mode. Even the sword monarch of Great Zhou does not know that. I am here to be your disciple. As long as you agree, I can give up Great Zhou's heaven selection and follow you to roam the world." Zhou Xuanji frowned and said, "Are you stupid? Give up Great Zhou's heaven selection to follow him?" Zhou Xuanji could not understand it. Could it be that this person had other intentions? Fang Junsheng scratched his head and smiled, "Actually, I don't want to participate in Great Zhou's heaven selection. It was my family that forced me to. I wanted to leave my family a long time ago." Sword God Zhou appeared out of nowhere and had never tasted defeat. He even dared to reject the Sword Monarch's offer and burned the Xia sect sword library. He had long become someone who was respected by countless people. Especially among the sword cultivators, many were dissatisfied with the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou's fame and fortune. The appearance of Sword God Zhou gave them hope that the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou would be overthrown. Of course, it was only hope. Judging from his performance, Sword God Zhou was far from the Sword Monarch. Zhou Xuanji threw a glance at Zhao Zongjian, who immediately understood and thrust his sword toward Fang Junsheng. Fang Junsheng understood that this was a test. He raised his spirits and drew his sword to meet the attack. The two of them exchanged blows on the mountain top. Their swords clashed, and sparks flew. It was very exciting. Little Jiang Shui, Northern Sword Valiant, Huang Lianxin, A Big and Small Air, the three-eyed drought rodent, and the little black snake all looked over. At this moment, a silhouette leaped over the cliff and landed in front of Zhou Xuanji. Seeing him, Northern Sword Valiant's expression changed drastically. The little black snake hid behind the three-eyed drought rodent out of fear. It was Xiao Jinghong. He wore a white robe and a bamboo hat. With a sword in his hand, he looked like a wandering swordsman. He walked up to Zhou Xuanji and half knelt down. "Greetings, revered teacher." Zhou Xuanji was a little surprised and asked, "Why are you here?" Northern Sword Valiant and the little black snake swallowed their saliva. Although they knew that Xiao Jinghong was Zhou Xuanji's disciple, seeing it with their own eyes still shocked them greatly. Xiao Jinghong looked up and said with a smile, "There are still 2 more years before my duel with Meng Tianlang. I want to come here to continue my training and master dual sword wills." Zhao Zongjian and Fang Junsheng, who were sparring, opened their eyes wide. Sword Noble, he was Sword God Zhou's disciple? Both of them were shocked, including Zhao Zongjian. He thought that Northern Sword Valiant was bragging, but he did not expect it to be true. Xiao Jinghong ignored their gazes. He got up and said to Zhou Xuanji, "These years, I went to the depths of Gulan Forest and challenged the Gulan Demon Monarch. Unfortunately, I lost terribly and almost did not come back. But fortunately, I broke through to Astral Infant. If I master dual sword wills, Meng Tianlang will not be my match." Chapter 78. Breakthrough to the Nascent Soul Realm. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow. This brat is so powerful? The cultivation realms of the human race, from low to high, were qi nourishing, foundation establishment, enlightening, inner Dan, spirit spring, and nascent soul. Once one reached the nascent soul realm, as long as they didn't encounter a great disaster, it wouldn't be a problem for them to live for 1,000 years. He asked, "Did you follow me and protect me in the dark?" Nodding his head, Xiao Jinghong sighed, "Master's speed of improvement is something I'm far inferior to." Back then, when they had first met Zhou Xuanji, he was already devilish enough. Now, he had reached the 7th level of the enlightening realm at the age of 12, he was even more monstrous than Zhao Zongjian and Zhou Yalong. Zhou Xuanji gestured for him to sit down, then waved at the 3 of them. Huang Lianxin and Beixiao Wangjian took the initiative to introduce themselves. Beixiao Wangjian looked at Xiao Jinghong with a complicated expression. Back then, he had lost to Northern Valiant Sword. "Northern Sword Valiant, although you are not talented, you have good foresight. You will be fortunate in the future." Xiao Jinghong nodded at Northern Sword Valiant and smiled. His tone made Northern Sword Valiant very unhappy. Xiao Jinghong was Zhou Xuanji's disciple, while Beixiao Wangjian was a sword slave. Northern Sword Valiant snorted coldly, "I'm already very fortunate." These words were spoken from the bottom of his heart. Following Zhou Xuanji, his sword technique had been improving. Every day was fulfilling, and he did not have to challenge other swordsmen like before to seek a breakthrough. Zhou Xuanji asked a few more questions, and Xiao Jinghong answered honestly. In the end, Xiao Jinghong smiled and said, "After I defeat Meng Tianlang, I will follow Master to roam the world." "Master, what is your goal? Target?" Zhou Xuanji could not help but think. After taking revenge, he planned to travel around the world. Therefore, he was filled with lofty sentiments and said with a smile, "There will be a day when 10,000 swords soar in the sky, and I will stand at the highest point." As soon as he said that, everyone was stunned. They thought of Zhou Xuanji's 10-sword mode. It turned out that 10 strikes was not his limit. His goal was 10,000 strikes. They imagined the scene and got goosebumps. Xiao Jinghong sighed, Master's idea is truly spectacular. Little Jiang Shui curled her lips and said, he's invincible when he brags. Zhou Xuanji rolled his eyes at her and said, just you wait. That day will come. The other side. Zhao Congjian defeated Fang Junsheng. Fang Junsheng looked defeated. Xiao Jinghong glanced at them and said, this kid isn't worthy of being your disciple. He's more suitable to be a sword slave. When Fang Junsheng heard this, he wished he could find a hole to hide in. With Xiao Jinghong around, the threshold to become Zhou Xuanji's disciple was high, and he could not rebut. Zhou Xuanji looked at Fang Junsheng and asked, you really want to follow me? Fang Junsheng immediately ran over and knelt behind Zhou Xuanji. Even if I become a sword slave, I'm willing. My path is the way of the sword, and my family can't give me much help. My family is not on good terms with the sword monarch of Great Zhou, and it's impossible for me to become his disciple, so I can only rely on you. Zhou Xuanji muttered, follow us for half a year first. Within half a year, if I'm not satisfied, you can leave. Fang Junsheng was overjoyed and quickly kowtowed toward Zhou Xuanji. Xiao Jinghong's lips curled upwards, but he didn't say anything. Zhao Congjian, on the other hand, stared at Xiao Jinghong with a burning desire to fight in his eyes. Beixiao Wangjian clenched his fists tightly in his sleeves. He had to work hard and couldn't always be at the bottom. The addition of Xiao Jinghong and Fang Junsheng made the group even livelier. From then on, Zhou Xuanji would teach Xiao Jinghong every day. Seeing how Xiao Jinghong humbly sought guidance in front of Zhou Xuanji, Zhao Congjian, Beixiao Wangjian, and Fang Junsheng were all stimulated. Zhou Xuanji's image in their hearts grew bigger. Half a month later, Zhao Congjian could not hold it in anymore and challenged Xiao Jinghong. In the end, he was defeated in less than 3 moves. Zhao Congjian, the undefeatable 3 sword moves. This title was so ear-piercing to Zhao Congjian. When my revered teacher was 6 years old, he defeated me with his sword techniques alone. Xiao Jinghong pointed his sword at Zhao Congjian's throat and said expressionlessly. Zhao Congjian's pupils contracted, and his expression turned bitter. Zhou Xuanji could not bear it anymore. He stared at Xiao Jinghong and said, don't bully me. Xiao Jinghong smiled and turned around to continue his training. Zhou Xuanji waved his hand at Zhao Congjian and said, I will teach you how to manifest the sword will of the vibrant raindrop sword. Zhao Congjian heard him and his eyes brightened. He immediately forgot about his unhappiness and walked quickly toward Zhou Xuanji. Under the tree, Fang Junsheng was building a house as he asked Beixiao Wangjian, who was training beside him, Brother Beixiao, how many sword techniques does Master know? I feel that he knows many types of sword wills. He really liked the atmosphere when Zhou Xuanji and the others trained. Other than little Jiang Shui, everyone enjoyed training their sword techniques. The positive atmosphere was infectious to him. Beixiao Wangjian replied, Master is unfathomable. It's not something that you and I can guess. Every sword technique that he knows, he can manifest the sword will. Zhou Xuanji's talent had already made him a god. Fang Junsheng nodded and continued to build the house. He looked back occasionally. Little Jiang Shui and Huang Lianxin were training in front of a big and small air. Zhou Xuanji obtained many spells, enough for little Jiang Shui to train for a few hundred years. Ever since Xiao Jinghong joined, the little black snake became extremely well-behaved. It did not even speak a word. It was probably pretending to be an ordinary snake. The group did not expose it and intended to suffocate it to death. In a valley, countless snakes were gathered here in a dense mass. They were like a black ocean that surged endlessly, causing one to feel a chill run down one's spine. On a giant rock, two demons in human form stood. One was a man and the other was a woman. The man had an evil aura, while the woman had a bewitching charm. Their lower body was that of a snake, while their upper body wore clothes made of snakeskin. Husband, are we really going to deal with Sword God Zhou? Until now, no one knows how powerful he is. The female demon frowned and asked worriedly. The male demon waved his hand and said proudly, "Who am I? I am Nanheng Snake Lord. Xia Wuyo is nothing in front of me with his cultivation of 5th rank level 10. And Sword God Zhou could not even deal with Xia Wuyo. He is not that powerful. 5th rank level 10 was equivalent to Soul Fountain level 10. Nanheng Snake Lord held the female demon's hand and comforted her, "Don't worry, my dear. As long as we can take down Sword God Zhou's head, I will bring you and our children away from Great Zhou. We will go to the demon race's territory and never participate in any conflicts." The female demon sighed. Her bewitching face was filled with sorrow. She said faintly, "The demon monarch is too much. Didn't he owe the Gulan demon monarch a demonic pellet back then? He sent us to kill Sword God Zhou because of this. We have no choice. Our demon monarch cares about morality the most." Nanheng Snake Lord shook his head and smiled. After that, he turned to look at the sea of snakes below. With a hideous smile, he shouted, "All of you, go and find Sword God Zhou's whereabouts. Remember what I told you before." After he spoke, all the snakes dashed toward different directions. They crawled all over the mountain walls, as though they were dyed with a layer of black. On the other side, Zhou Xuanji and the others had another uninvited guest. Seeing him, everyone's expression changed slightly. They did not attack immediately. The person was the second on Great Zhou's reputation ranking, Meng Tianlang. Meng Tianlang had already broken through to Astral Infant 4 years ago. He was one step faster than Xiao Jinghong, but he was much older than Xiao Jinghong. He wore Great Zhou's iron armor and rode on a fierce horse. The horse's hooves stepped on the clouds. Xiao Jinghong. Meng Tianlang squinted his eyes and stared at Xiao Jinghong. The smile on his face disappeared quickly. He was here to look for Sword God Zhou, but he did not expect to meet his nemesis. Xiao Jinghong looked at him expressionlessly and did not make a sound. Their eyes met, and the atmosphere became heavy. Beixiao Wangjian, Fang Junsheng, and Huang Lianxin were extremely nervous. Chapter 79. General Meng, long time no see. Zhou Xuanji said with a calm expression. He was thinking about how to reject Meng Tianlang. Meng Tianlang turned to look at him with a complicated expression, Sword God Zhou. Back then, Zhou Xuanji pretended to be a kid and lied to him. He lied that he was going to participate in Great Zhou's heaven selection and cheated him of his General Meng token. After that, Zhou Xuanji never went to Great Zhou's camp. Meng Tianlang was furious, but he did not take it to heart. But today, they found out that the kid was Sword God Zhou. Sword God Zhou was standing together with his archenemy, Xiao Jinghong. Enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. Zhao Zongjian stepped out and blocked in front of Zhou Xuanji. "Are you going to attack?" he asked. Facing Meng Tianlang, whose reputation was not inferior to that of the Sword Sovereign, he was eager to try. "You can leave," Zhou Xuanji said unpleasantly. This guy was always so impulsive. Meng Tianlang was not Xiao Jinghong. If they really fought, Zhao Zongjian would definitely die. Zhao Zongjian was indeed talented, but like Zhou Xuanji, he needed time. Clang! Xiao Jinghong raised his right hand, holding the sword in his hand. With a flick of his thumb, he pulled out the hilt of the sword, revealing half of the blade. He looked up at Meng Tianlang and said, "Sword God Zhou is my revered teacher. If you want to deal with him, ask the sword in my hand first. Meng Tianlang opened his eyes wide, somewhat not daring to believe his ears. After being stunned for a moment, he suddenly threw his head back and laughed heartily, his hands clutching his stomach. Xiao Jinghong, oh Xiao Jinghong, you actually acknowledged such a kid as your master? Are you King possessed? Meng Tianlang laughed angrily, and his tone contained a tone of exasperation that she didn't live up to his expectations. He saw Xiao Jinghong as his lifelong rival, and Xiao Jinghong's actions made him feel humiliated. Xiao Jinghong remained expressionless. What are you laughing at? Do you know how powerful my master is? Frog at the bottom of a well, short-sighted. Meng Tianlang stopped smiling and said, he's only in the enlightening realm. How powerful can he be? Zhou Xuanji's qi obscuring incantation was not omnipotent. Meng Tianlang was at the astral infant stage and could see through his cultivation at a glance. How could Zhou Xuanji allow him to continue humiliating him? You look down on me. How about this, since you have a high cultivation, do you dare to take my sword head-on? If you come out unscathed, I'll admit defeat and I'll give you the 2 dragon eagles. If I win, you'll be my slave. Do you dare? Zhou Xuanji said. With these words, everyone's gaze fell on him. Master, Zhao Zongjian wanted to say something but stopped. Meng Tianlang was at the astral infant stage, which was 3 stages lower than Zhou Xuanji. How could he defeat him? Xiao Jinghong looked at Zhou Xuanji in astonishment. Huang Lianxin, Beixiao Wangjian, and Fang Junsheng were too nervous to speak. Little Jiang Shui looked at Zhou Xuanji in silence. This is insane. The little black snake hid behind the 3-eyed drought rodent and muttered to itself. Meng Tianlang frowned, feeling that something was wrong. This brat is so fearless, where does he get his confidence from? What? You're the great Zhou cavalry general, are you afraid? Zhou Xuanji said with a smile, provoking Meng Tianlang on purpose. Damn it! How can this brat be so eloquent? Meng Tianlang cursed in his heart. Last time, he was fooled by this brat. Now that he thought about it, he blushed and wanted to beat Zhou Xuanji up. Xiao Jinghong raised his brow and said, of course he doesn't dare to. He can't afford to lose. Meng Tianlang heard him and snorted coldly, then bring it on. I have another request. Only you can fight. He was also afraid that Zhou Xuanji was up to something. Zhou Xuanji took out the furious ape sword and said, I will rely on this sword. Everyone looked at it and was shocked. Such a handsome sword. Meng Tianlang heaved a sigh of relief. This sword was indeed powerful, but it was still a pipe dream to threaten him. He had his own powerful enchanted artifact, why should he be afraid? Brat, brat. Your standards are still too low. You have never experienced the sky of the astral infant stage. Meng Tianlang thought to himself with a cold smile. He immediately took out his broadsword and said with a smile, come on, your dragon eagles are mine. Thinking about how he humiliated Xiao Jinghong's revered teacher, he felt so good. Xiao Jinghong walked to the side and looked at Zhou Xuanji calmly. At this moment, he suddenly thought of what happened 6 years ago. The current situation was so similar to what happened back then. Zhou Xuanji pointed his sword at Meng Tianlang and said, don't regret, don't dodge. Meng Tianlang leaped up and landed on the edge of the cliff. He stood proudly and said, if I regret, I'm your son. If I dodge, I'm your grandson. What a grandson. Zhou Xuanji smiled and immediately channeled his spirit energy into the furious ape sword. In that instant, the furious ape sword trembled slightly, but there was no unusual phenomenon. Zhou Xuanji could sense that the furious ape sword was already charging up. It contained an extremely powerful force. Meng Tianlang was all smiles. He did not even place his broadsword horizontally in front of him and waited for Zhou Xuanji to attack. The others looked at Zhou Xuanji anxiously. The two of them were 10 meters apart. This distance was already very close for them. Even a big and small air were observing. Zhou Xuanji held the sword with his right hand and channeled his spirit energy into it. His eyes were fixed on Meng Tianlang. Meng Tianlang looked calm and collected, but he was sweating in his heart. This kid is so confident. It must be a powerful sword technique. He had heard about the legend of sword god Zhou before. So he was on his guard and was afraid that Zhou Xuanji would suddenly take out the other 8 swords. The two of them looked at each other with confidence written all over their faces. 1 breath's time. 2 breaths' time. 3 breaths' time. A gust of cold wind blew, which made the atmosphere even more silent. No one dared to blink, afraid that they would miss something. A while later, Meng Tianlang's smile froze. He could not hold it in anymore and said with a deep voice, "Kid, are you going to attack or not? Why are you in such a hurry? Are you afraid?" Zhou Xuanji asked calmly. As he spoke, he was still internalizing qi and absorbing the surrounding spiritual qi. Multitasking. That was his talent. Meng Tianlang snorted coldly, "Me? Afraid? Then I will wait for you. I want to see what tricks you have up your sleeves." He understood in his heart that this kid wanted to attack him when he was not on guard. Back then, when he first joined the army, he could do the horse stance for 16 hours. When was he ever afraid? The two of them looked at each other again. Time continued to pass. After half an hour, little Jiang Shui could not hold it in anymore and sat on the ground. The others followed suit. It was too torturous. They were not afraid that Meng Tianlang would defeat Zhou Xuanji. Xiao Jinghong was here anyway. Xiao Jinghong was also a little confused. What was his master waiting for? He noticed that the surrounding spiritual qi was flowing into Zhou Xuanji's body, but it was not as fast as Zhou Xuanji's internalization of qi, so he did not take it to heart. An hour later, Meng Tianlang's face was gloomy, the veins on his forehead bulged, and he gnashed his teeth. How much longer does this kid have to wait? I'm at the nascent soul realm. I'm going to exhaust you to death. Zhou Xuanji continued to stare at him expressionlessly. Under this kind of gaze, Meng Tianlang did not speak, in case he appeared to lose his composure. 2 hours. 4 hours. Dusk came and the moon rose. Good lad. How ruthless. Meng Tianlang thought to himself as he stared at Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji was also looking at him. Xiao Jinghong had already sat down. He was not far from Zhou Xuanji and was protecting him. The others gathered around the fire and began to eat. Fang Junsheng sighed. Both seniors are ruthless. Beixiao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin nodded, their faces filled with emotions. It was their first time witnessing a duel like this. Little Jiang Shui turned around and shouted, "Do you want to eat first before continuing?" Eat? How can it be? I'm accumulating my energy. Zhou Xuanji shouted, "In a duel, we must focus. In a battle between powerful cultivators, victory or defeat is decided in an instant. I'm looking for his flaws, and so is he. If I eat now, won't I be disrespecting him and not worthy of being called a powerful cultivator?" Meng Tianlang, who was about to eat, heard him and immediately gave up on the idea. He laughed coldly, "Kid, you have a backbone. I will fight you to the end and make you admit defeat." Chapter 80. It was late at night, and the bright moon hung high in the sky. The roars of demons could be heard from time to time, which added a sense of horror to the night. On the top of the mountain, before the cliff, Zhou Xuanji and Meng Tianlang were still facing off. The bone-chilling wind blew. The others were already in the state of cultivation, and only the two of them were still standing. To prevent Meng Tianlang from attacking, Zhou Xuanji said, "Very good. You are indeed great Zhou's cavalry general. I have a whole new level of respect for your endurance." Meng Tianlang was brave and smart. Although he could tell that Zhou Xuanji was up to no good, he cared about his reputation and was confident in his power, so he was in a stalemate with Zhou Xuanji. Facing Zhou Xuanji's compliment, he said with disdain, "How can you know the fierce battles that I, Meng Tianlang, have been through?" Xiao Jinghong could not help but shake his head. Meng Tianlang was good at everything, except that he paid too much attention to his morals. He would not break his promise. This was also the reason why Xiao Jinghong saw him as a lifelong enemy. But Zhou Xuanji was too cunning. He saw through Meng Tianlang with one look and forced Meng Tianlang to not dare to step down. Now, Xiao Jinghong was curious about what Zhou Xuanji would do. Could he be waiting for Meng Tianlang to let his guard down and attack suddenly? But even so, it was extremely difficult to hurt Meng Tianlang. Meng Tianlang was not at inner pellet or soul fountain, but astral infant. No matter how powerful a sword technique was, it could not surpass 3 stages. Moreover, Meng Tianlang was not an ordinary person. He was extremely talented in battle. Time continued to pass. The moon set and the sun rose. When the first ray of sunlight came from the horizon, Zhou Xuanji had less than a quarter of his spirit energy left in his body. Even though he had been internalizing qi, it could not be compared to the speed at which he channeled his spirit energy. He thought to himself, "Is the spirit energy in the furious ape sword enough?" Seeing that he was frowning, Meng Tianlang thought that he was panicking, so he laughed coldly. "What? You can't find my weakness? Admit defeat and give me the dragon eagle." Zhou Xuanji said with a deep voice, "I have not drawn my sword, so the outcome is not decided yet. If you are impatient, you can cancel the agreement. If you break it, don't even think about getting my dragon eagle." Meng Tianlang heard him and snorted. The art of war says that it is better to adapt to the situation and wait for opportunities to come. I have been leading and fighting for many years. How can you compare to my patience? Compared to the dragon eagle, he wanted to surpass Xiao Jinghong more. If he defeated Zhou Xuanji, he would have defeated Xiao Jinghong. Alright, let's continue. You said that if you regret it, you're my son. If you avoid it, you're my grandson. Zhou Xuanji pretended to be heroic and shouted. He could not help but glance at Xiao Jinghong. If Xiao Jinghong wasn't here, he wouldn't be able to provoke Meng Tianlang like this. The two of them continued to be in a deadlock. 2 hours. 4 hours. Noon came. Northern Valiant Sword and Zhao Zongjian started to practice their swordsmanship while Fang Junsheng waited eagerly. Xiao Jinghong had been sitting near Zhou Xuanji to support him. In the afternoon, 2 cultivators flew past the cliff. When they saw Zhou Xuanji and Meng Tianlang, they were stunned. "That's Meng Tianlang, General Meng." One of them exclaimed. They were all chosen ones and had seen Meng Tianlang before. The two of them turned to look at Zhou Xuanji. There were no children in the immortal Severing Mountain range. It could only be the unparalleled sword god Zhou. General Meng and sword god Zhou are confronting each other? The other person cried out. The two of them immediately flew to a nearby mountain and looked at the battle. They were very excited. No matter if it was sword god Zhou or Meng Tianlang, they were both famous people. Their battle would surely be exciting. However, they watched for a long time, but neither of them made a move. What are they doing? One of them mumbled. The other person rubbed his chin and said mysteriously, in a battle between powerful cultivators, victory or defeat is usually decided in an instant. They are looking for their opponent's flaws. Once they make a move, victory or defeat will be decided. The two of them held their breaths and waited quietly. Time ticked by. 6 hours later, 4 more cultivators passed by and joined the crowd of spectators. Far away, on a mountain top, 2 giant snakes coiled around the mountain wall and transformed into Nanheng Snake Lord and his wife. Nanheng Snake Lord frowned and mumbled, "Why is Meng Tianlang here?" He could not defeat Meng Tianlang. Among the demons, Meng Tianlang's cultivation was equivalent to a 6th-rank Great Demon King. The Snake Lady said anxiously, "Then we cannot attack." Hearing Meng Tianlang's name, she was so frightened that her tail could not stand steadily. She did not agree to kill Sword God Zhou in the first place, and she would not agree even more now. Nanheng Snake Lord nodded and said, "Let's watch first." Maybe Meng Tianlang would kill Zhou Xuanji, and he would take the opportunity to decapitate him. Time passed. The sun set, and the moon rose. Night fell again. Zhou Xuanji's spirit energy was almost depleted, so he reduced the speed at which he accumulated energy. After a day and a night, the surging energy contained in the furious ape sword shocked even him. Of course, he was the only one who could sense it. Even Meng Tianlang and Xiao Jinghong, who were at the astral infant stage, could not sense the energy contained in the furious ape sword. It's not enough. Hold on. When this guy can't hold it any longer, I will attack. Zhou Xuanji thought to himself, but he was still looking at Meng Tianlang. Meng Tianlang could sense the will to fight in his eyes and was in awe of this guy's perseverance. The two continued to confront each other. The moon set, and the sun rose. The third day came. The spectating cultivators were a little tired. They all internalized qi and observed. Last night, someone used a spell to spread the news. Just as the sun rose, 6 cultivators came and joined the spectators. It's really General Meng. Why does he want to fight Sword God Zhou? Although the two of them did not fight, this silent scene makes me feel like I'm suffocating. I heard that they have been confronting each other for a few days and have yet to fight. Such determination, can you guys do it? Is the one beside Sword God Zhou the Sword Noble? Wait, the Sword Noble? The cultivators discussed among themselves. Soon, someone recognized Xiao Jinghong, which made them even more excited. The Sword Noble, Meng Tianlang, and Sword God Zhou. The 3 majestic and powerful cultivators gathered together. They cast their spells and spread the news. In the next few days, more and more people knew about this. Even the royal family and generals were alerted. More and more people came to the cliff where Zhou Xuanji and the others were. 6 days later, Zhou Chengxin, Princess Xuanya, and the other princes arrived one after another. Seeing Zhou Xuanji, Zhou Chengxin sighed in amazement, "Sir Zhou is so powerful. He faced General Meng so quickly." So this was what he meant by Great Zhou's heaven selection. Well, with his power, there is no need for him to participate in Great Zhou's heaven selection. Princess Xuanya, who was not far away, also looked at Zhou Xuanji with admiration. Ever since she met Zhou Xuanji, she felt that the whole world was talking about him. He was so dazzling. On the other side, Zhou Xuanji's hands began to tremble. It was not because he was tired, but because the energy contained in the furious ape sword was too powerful. Meng Tianlang sensed that more and more people were gathering around him. At this moment, he could not make the first move. When he saw Zhou Xuanji's trembling right hand, he could not help but laugh. "Brat, are you getting tired?" Zhou Xuanji's forehead was covered in sweat. "I will get tired." Meng Tianlang laughed coldly. Another 2 days passed. Zhou Xuanji's legs began to tremble. Meng Tianlang mocked, "Admit defeat. I'm filled with energy. You can't beat me." Zhou Xuanji stared at him. His face was covered in cold sweat. He pretended to be calm and said, "I'm going to attack." Meng Tianlang's body trembled. He understood that Zhou Xuanji could no longer find his weakness, so he decided to give it his all. He laughed and said, "You are going to attack now. It seems like you have miscalculated. If you knew this, you should have attacked straight away." Chapter 81. The conversation between Zhou Xuanji and Meng Tianlang was heard by all the spectators. Little Jiang Shui, Zhao Zongjian, and the others even got up and watched nervously. Sword God Zhou is going to draw his sword. It's finally starting. I've waited for 10 days. Looking at Sword God Zhou, he might not be able to defeat General Meng. Not necessarily, maybe it's a big move. Who will win? The spectators discussed animatedly with their eyes wide open. They didn't dare to blink for fear of missing the most exciting moment. Zhou Chengxin was also worried for Zhou Xuanji. His relationship with Meng Tianlang was not very good. In comparison, Zhou Xuanji was easier to rope in, so he hoped that Zhou Xuanji would win. He had helped Zhou Xuanji before. If Zhou Xuanji's fame grew, people would definitely mention him and add to his good name. In the distance, Nanheng Snake Lord and his wife transformed into 2 little snakes and watched from afar. "Husband, who do you think will win?" the Lamia asked curiously. It was the first time she had seen someone confront each other for so long on the eve of a battle. Nanheng Snake Lord muttered, "It should be Meng Tianlang, ranked second on Great Zhou's reputation ranking. His talent in battle goes without saying. Although Sword God Zhou's background is mysterious, he looks like an arrow at the end of its flight." Most of the spectators believed that Meng Tianlang would win. Meng Tianlang behaved calmly, but when he looked at Sword God Zhou, his legs were trembling and his forehead was covered in sweat. When the two of them stood together, it was easy for others to judge. Zhou Xuanji took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. He was very excited. He was also very perturbed. He was afraid that this sword strike would kill Meng Tianlang. "Don't forget what you said. Don't hide." Zhou Xuanji smiled and reminded him again. Meng Tianlang said disdainfully, "I, Meng Tianlang, have always kept my word. I'd rather die than regret it." Xiao Jinghong also fixed his gaze on Zhou Xuanji. He wanted to see what sword technique Zhou Xuanji was going to use. Zhou Xuanji stared at Meng Tianlang and said, "This sword technique is called Tempest Slash. I learned it from the Xia sect sword library. It's Earth grade low tier, and it's the most powerful sword technique in the sword library." With so many people watching, he naturally had to insult the Xia sect. After saying that, he directly entered the sword intent state of the Tempest Slash. Great wind, rise. Hoo! Zhou Xuanji's black robe danced in the wind around him, forming a small tornado visible to the naked eye. Everyone held their breaths and focused, waiting for Zhou Xuanji to attack. Sword intent? Meng Tianlang narrowed his eyes. This brat managed to cultivate the sword intent of the Tempest Slash so quickly? No wonder he could become Xiao Jinghong's master. No one can stand before my sword. Meng Tianlang. Your reputation will not be tarnished if you are defeated by this sword. Because the one who defeated you is me. Zhou Xuanji laughed out loud suddenly. His left hand descended swiftly, and with both hands on his sword, he slashed furiously. Tempest Skybreaker Slash. Roar, the furious roar of the ancient ape was earth-shattering. A terrifying sword energy visible to the naked eye shot towards Meng Tianlang. In front of this sword energy, Meng Tianlang seemed so tiny. In an instant, Meng Tianlang and Xiao Jinghong were visibly moved. "This is..." Xiao Jinghong's eyes widened in excitement. Meng Tianlang was even more shocked and immediately slashed with his saber. A loud boom resounded. Meng Tianlong's saber was broken, and his body was sent flying away by the sword qi. His armor was shattered, and blood splattered everywhere. He flew out nearly 1,000 meters with extreme speed and smashed into a small mountain. Crushed rocks flew everywhere. The white sword qi, which was 30 meters long, was like a crescent moon in the sky. It was accompanied by the furious roar of the ancient ape, which shook everyone's heart. The cliff in front of Zhou Xuanji crumbled immediately. The sword qi left hundreds of tiny cracks on the ground. A violent gale blew between the heavens and the earth, which made the forest below look like a green ocean with raging waves. This slash used up all of his stamina and spirit energy. His legs gave way, and he quickly stabbed his sword into the ground to support his body. Silence. The entire world was silent. Even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. Everyone looked at Zhou Xuanji in disbelief. That slash just now made everyone tremble in fear. Especially the furious roar of the ancient ape, which almost scared them out of their wits. Zhou Xuanji panted with his sword in hand. He tried his best to stand up straight. At this moment, he had to hold on. Oh my! This legendary sword is too ferocious. If I accumulate my energy for a few years, can I destroy Great Zhou? Zhou Xuanji exclaimed in his heart. Suddenly, he had a bold idea. Which was to stay near the Great Zhou royal palace and accumulate energy every day. After half a year, he would slash the Great Zhou royal palace in half a year. There's a chance. But he was not sure how powerful Emperor Yan of Zhou was. Maybe half a year was not enough? No matter what, the Furious Ape Sword was already his most powerful legendary sword. In terms of destructive power, it was limitless. Little Jiang Shui immediately pounced over and hugged Zhou Xuanji. She was very excited and cried out continuously, "So powerful! So powerful!" She looked excited, but she was actually supporting Zhou Xuanji. Being hugged by her, Zhou Xuanji did not fall but felt more relaxed. Zhao Congjian, Beishao Wangjian, Huang Lianxin, and Fang Junsheng walked over. They were so excited that they could not speak coherently. The little black snake laid on the three-eyed drought rodent's head and was dumbfounded. Did I see it wrong? This brat is definitely the reincarnation of an ancient demon. So terrifying. So terrifying. It mumbled. Xiao Jinghong was stunned on the spot. He seemed to be in a daze. He could not stop replaying the slash just now in his mind. Stunning. Domineering. Unstoppable. He was thinking, if it was him, would he be able to block that slash directly? The other spectators came back to their senses and cried out in surprise. Oh my god! That slash just now! Xia Sect's sword technique is so powerful. Sword God Zhou is too powerful. Meng Tianlang could not even withstand a single blow from him. Meng Tianlang did not dodge. That slash is too powerful. It totally matches the title of Sword God. Most of them were extremely excited, as though they were Sword God Zhou themselves. Great Zhou's generals and princes flew toward Meng Tianlang. They did not want him to die here. With Meng Tianlang's talent, it would not be difficult for him to become a first-rank general. Losing Meng Tianlang was like losing a pillar for Great Zhou. Zhou Qingxin and Princess Xuanya flew toward Zhou Xuanji. Master, when can I learn the Tempest Slash? Zhao Congjian held back his excitement and asked. His eyes were filled with anticipation. Zhou Xuanji glanced at him and smiled, that day will come. It's a pity that you don't have the Furious Ape Sword. Even if you master the Tempest Slash to the extreme, you will not be as graceful as me. Under the crowd's encirclement, Zhou Xuanji quickly took out a bottle of pills and poured them into his mouth to prevent others from seeing. Sir Zhou, you are so graceful. Zhou Qingxin's voice came from behind Beishao Wangjian. Princess Xuanya followed behind him, and she was looking at Zhou Xuanji charmingly. Zhou Xuanji looked calm and said, "Seventh Prince, why are you here?" Zhou Qingxin smiled and said, "The competition between you and General Meng has spread throughout the Great Zhou's heaven selection. How can I not come and take a look?" Zhou Xuanji nodded and did not speak anymore. He began to recuperate his qi and blood. He mumbled in his heart, "Please don't let Meng Tianlang die." He was quite fond of such a powerful fighter. The cultivators who were watching from afar also wanted to befriend Zhou Xuanji. But when Xiao Jinghong drew his sword, all of them retreated like frightened birds. On the other side, on a small mountain, the two snakes were silent. "Husband?" the snake lady asked. Nanheng Snake Lord said, "My wife, you don't have to say much." "I understand." After that, the two snakes quickly climbed down and disappeared into the forest. Chapter 82. Nanheng Snake Lord left with his wife dejectedly, not attracting any attention. Meng Tianlang, who was embedded in the mountain, was carried out. His entire body was covered in blood, his hair was in a mess, and he looked extremely miserable. If not for the rise and fall of his chest, one would have thought that he was already dead. One of the generals asked nervously, "General Meng, are you all right?" Meng Tianlang raised his head with great difficulty. His face was covered in blood, and his eyes revealed shock and horror. "I've been tricked. How was this a competition of patience? This kid was purposely trying to make him relax." At this moment, Meng Tianlang wished that he was already dead. Thinking about becoming Zhou Xuanji's slave, he spat out a mouthful of blood onto the general in front of him. Zhou Xuanji had already seen Meng Tianlang's miserable state. He smiled and said, "I'm going to have another sword slave." Northern Sword Valiant grinned and said, "It should be Dao Nu." Zhou Qingxin and Princess Xuanya were both curious. What did Zhou Xuanji mean? Zhao Zongjian's relationship with Zhou Qingxin was not bad, so he explained it to him. When the two great Zhou royal family members heard this, their expressions became strange. If Meng Tianlang became Zhou Xuanji's servant, the Emperor of Great Zhou, Emperor Yan of Zhou, would be furious. After all, Emperor Yan of Zhou had high hopes for Meng Tianlang. Zhou Qingxin wanted to remind Zhou Xuanji, but he felt that it was not the right time to make sarcastic remarks, so he could only hold it in. Soon, Great Zhou's generals and princes helped Meng Tianlang to the top of the mountain. All of them looked at Zhou Xuanji furiously and wanted to tear him into pieces. Meng Tianlang stood up with difficulty. He looked at Zhou Xuanji and said with gritted teeth, "Shameless brat. You tricked me." Zhou Xuanji said calmly, "How?" "You." Meng Tianlang wanted to say something, but he did not know where to start. Zhou Xuanji only used the furious ape sword and no one else helped him. Everything was within the agreement. But, he was so aggrieved. The injuries all over his body told him that he had really lost. Zhou Xuanji purposely frowned and said unhappily, "Meng Tianlang, you want to go back on your word?" In his heart, he was already rolling with laughter. It felt so good. "Who asked you to look down on me? In the future, I'll make you follow behind me and call me master every day." Meng Tianlang was exasperated and didn't know what to say. At this moment, he noticed that Xiao Jinghong was frowning. He was instantly enraged and roared, "I'm a man of my word. Just you wait, after this Great Zhou's heaven selection, I'll resign from my position as a general and work like a slave for you. Go." The surrounding generals and princes jumped in fright when they heard that. Meng Tianlang wanted to resign from his position as a general and join Sword God Zhou? They hurriedly asked as they supported Meng Tianlang away. To the generals, Meng Tianlang was a rare genius on the battlefield. For the princes, if they could rope in Meng Tianlang, they would be closer to the throne. After they left, Zhou Chengxin couldn't help but sigh, General Meng, a single mistake brings everlasting sorrow. He muttered in his heart. Wasn't Meng Tianlang very smart? Why did he suddenly become stupid? He even dared to compete in such a bet. Now he had failed miserably. Zhou Xuanji smiled. After the pill entered his body, he had the strength to stand up straight. It seemed that he would have to be more careful when using the Furious Ape Sword in the future. He didn't want to ruin himself. Too strong. Too strong. Fang Junsheng clenched his fists. He was so excited that he could not control himself, as though he was injected with chicken blood. After Zhou Chengxin chatted with Zhou Xuanji for a while, he left with Princess Xuanya, who was in a love-struck state. As the spectators left, the cliff quieted down again. Little Jiang Shui wrapped her arms around his neck and said meaningfully, "The way that princess looked at you just now, it was as though flowers were blooming." Zhou Xuanji curled his lip and said unpleasantly, "Have you forgotten who I am?" Little Jiang Shui heard him and realized that he was right. Zhou Xuanji was also a prince of Great Zhou, which was equivalent to Princess Xuanya's younger brother. She immediately beamed with joy and went to feed the dragon eagles. Xiao Jinghong walked over and took a deep breath. That slash just now was definitely not the power of an earth-grade sword technique. "Revered teacher, can you teach me?" Zhou Xuanji glanced at him and said, "Learn the dual sword wills first. Haste makes waste. There will be plenty of time and opportunities to learn other sword techniques in the future." Xiao Jinghong nodded, as though he was enlightened. In the next month, the news of Sword God Zhou severely injuring Meng Tianlang with a single strike swept across the immortal Sundering Mountain and the entire Great Zhou. Meng Tianlang's fame had been in the top 50 of Great Zhou's reputation ranking for a long time, and he was ranked second on Great Zhou's hero ranking board. He was a sharp blade that could protect Great Zhou's future, and even Emperor Yan of Zhou praised him. Such a powerful cultivator could not even block a single strike from Sword God Zhou? And almost died? In an instant, the name of Sword God Zhou was spread like wildfire. He had even surpassed Sword Monarch Xiao Jinghong. Zhou Xuanji and the others, who were in the immortal Sundering Mountain range, did not know any of this. Zhou Xuanji continued to cultivate day after day. Xiao Jinghong, Zhao Congjian, Beixiao Wangjian, and Huang Lianxin trained even harder after witnessing Zhou Xuanji's slash. Little Jiang Shui was also trying her best to internalize qi, charging towards the enlightening state. As Fang Junsheng watched them practice, he would also follow suit. As time passed, his understanding of the sword Dao also increased. On this day, Zhou Xuanji easily broke through to enlightening level 8. He was getting closer to the inner pellet realm. Zhao Congjian only broke through to inner pellet at the age of 18, and he was already crowned as the only one in history. Zhou Xuanji's goal was to break through to inner pellet before the age of 15. Judging from the current situation, it was not a difficult task. In front of the cliff, Xiao Jinghong held two swords in his hands and used two different sword techniques. He looked very impressive. He still had not mastered dual sword wills, but the speed at which he switched between his sword wills was much faster than before. Zhou Xuanji stood at the side and nodded occasionally. This disciple of his had good comprehension. He estimated that he would be able to master dual sword wills in less than half a year. Zhao Congjian ran over and said respectfully, "Master, the 36 Paths Jade Xiao sword has many transformations. There is something I don't understand." "Speak." Zhou Xuanji nodded and listened to Zhao Congjian's questions. He sighed in his heart. How are they sword slaves? They are all disciples. But he quite liked the process of nurturing them. What's the fun of traveling the world alone? With sword slaves, disciples, and maidservants, I can travel anywhere in the world. Whoever dares to cause trouble, sword slaves go. After Zhao Congjian's questions were answered, he left in satisfaction and continued to practice. Zhou Xuanji turned around and asked, "Will Meng Tianlang really keep his word?" Xiao Jinghong replied as he practiced, "Of course. But the Meng clan and the great Zhou royal family might not agree to it. He needs time to settle everything. A year later, we will have a battle. He can't run away." Zhou Xuanji nodded. If he were Emperor Yan of Zhou, how could he let go of such a talent? Shortly after, he continued his cultivation in peace and could not be bothered to think about this. 4 days later, he celebrated his 13th birthday. Analyze that the sword owner has reached 13 years old. Gacha started. Ding! Congratulations, the sword owner obtained, gold, water-driving sword, white dragon golden robe, 300 pieces of 3rd grade spirit stones. The sword spirit's voice came as expected. Zhou Xuanji, who was internalizing qi, opened his eyes. Another gold-grade legendary sword. Now, he had 5 gold-grade legendary swords. They were the Hell King sword, Thunderclap sword, Bloodbath sword, Furious Ape sword, and this water-driving sword. Good luck. Chapter 83. Zhou Xuanji took out the water-driving sword. The sword was silver-white in color, with ripple patterns on the blade. It was very beautiful, and it was 1.4 meters long. It felt light in his hand. Not bad. 3 lines of words appeared in front of his eyes: sword name, water-driving sword grade, gold description. With this legendary sword, one can control all water in the world. The range of control is proportional to the sword owner's power. Control all water in the world? Incredible. The water-driving sword could not only be used in battle, but it might have other uses in the future. Zhou Xuanji held the water-driving sword and practiced the white crane sword technique. After familiarizing himself with it, he sheathed the sword. The others were cultivating on their own and did not notice that he had another legendary sword. He opened his hands, and the white dragon golden robe appeared in his hands. Just like the verdant full cloud riding boots, once the owner was recognized, the robe would change according to his size and fit comfortably. After changing into the white dragon golden robe, his entire aura changed. On the clean white robe, there were golden dragons drawn with golden patterns. They were vivid and lifelike. As the saying goes, clothes make the man, while the saddle makes the man. After putting on the white dragon golden robe, Zhou Xuanji's royal aura was displayed. His face was as clear as jade, and he had sharp eyebrows and bright eyes. His black hair was tied up at the back of his head, making him look lively and handsome. He did not lose out to the princes of Great Zhou. Little Jiang Shui, who was internalizing qi in front of small air, saw him and immediately ran over. The others also noticed that Zhou Xuanji had changed his clothes. After they saw him, they all praised him in their hearts. What a young man! Xiao Jinghong frowned suddenly. For some reason, he felt that Zhou Xuanji looked like another person. Zhou. 13 years old. Could it be? Xiao Jinghong suddenly thought of something and could not help but be moved. Fang Junsheng, who was chopping wood, praised loudly, "Master, you are so wise and mighty." Northern Valiant Sword rolled his eyes. Can this brat be more serious in his bootlicking? Fang Junsheng was in the top 30 of Great Zhou's hero ranking board after all. He was at Inner Pellet and was more powerful than Northern Valiant Sword. But in front of Northern Valiant Sword, he always had to bow and bow. If there were no accidents, Fang Junsheng would become Zhou Xuanji's sword slave sooner or later. So Northern Valiant Sword's attitude became better and better. He did not even bother to scold him anymore. Little Jiang Shui moved closer to Zhou Xuanji and sized him up. She nodded continuously. "You're getting more and more handsome. God bless you, you didn't grow too old." Little Jiang Shui pinched Zhou Xuanji's cheeks and smiled happily. Zhou Xuanji glared at her and said unpleasantly, "Of course. In the future, not only will I be the top swordsman in the world, but I'll also be the top commander in the world." Little Jiang Shui covered her mouth and chuckled. "Yes, yes, yes. You're the most handsome." She suddenly thought of something and became discouraged. With a bitter face, she said, "Your clothes are really beautiful. I'm afraid the clothes I knitted for you can't compare." Zhou Xuanji comforted her, "It's okay, I understand your intentions. Don't knit any more in the future, lest it hurts your hands." After the age of 12, his height began to increase by leaps and bounds. Now, he was already at little Jiang Shui's eyebrows. He looked at the 17-year-old Jiang Shui, no, Jiang Shui. Zhou Xuanji was filled with amazement. The flower finally bloomed. Jiang Shui felt regret and disappointment. But when she looked up and met Zhou Xuanji's gaze, the gentleness in his eyes made her disappointment disappear immediately. She smiled sweetly and said, "I'll listen to you." The two of them stood at the edge of the cliff and began to chat. They talked about the jokes of the past and their hopes for the future. As they chatted, the two of them sat at the edge of the cliff. Jiang Shui could not change her bad habit. Once she got close to Zhou Xuanji, she could not help but feel up to him. And so, she wrapped her arms around Zhou Xuanji's neck. Zhou Xuanji said helplessly, "In another year, your arms will get sore if you hug me like this." Jiang Shui smiled without a care, "It's okay. You can hug me when the time comes." Hey, don't you understand? Men and women should not touch each other. We are all grown up. Hey, why are you talking to me about this? Don't we always sleep in the same room? Okay, from today onwards, let's sleep in separate rooms. You dare. The two of them began to quarrel, and the others were envious of them. Northern Sword Valiant sighed, "Back then, I had a childhood friend like him too." Fang Junsheng asked curiously, "What about now?" "Gone." Northern Sword Valiant replied calmly. After that, he turned around and left, leaving Fang Junsheng with a lonely and bleak silhouette. This was a man with a story. Fang Junsheng rubbed his chin and thought. Time passed quickly. Another 5 months had passed. Zhou Xuanji broke through to enlightening level 9, and the first stage of the Great Zhou Heaven selection came to an end. Following the shocking news of Sword God Zhou defeating Meng Tianlang, the cultivators who passed by the cliff dared not to cause trouble. Even the demon kings did not dare to get close. However, the peace was still broken. This day, a group of soldiers came on a cloud. There was a carriage on top of it. The carriage was luxurious and luxurious. It was more than 3 times the size of an ordinary carriage and looked like a small building. Zhao Congjian, Xiao Jinghong, Northern Sword Valiant, and the others gathered around Zhou Xuanji. Great Zhou's Meng clan's flag. It should be Meng Tianlang's elder. Xiao Jinghong said softly. The leader of the soldiers held a huge flag with the word Meng carved on it. Zhou Xuanji squinted his eyes and did not speak. Soon, the Meng clan soldiers stopped in front of the cliff. The curtain of the carriage was pulled open, and a middle-aged man wearing a black robe with python patterns walked out slowly. His sideburns were like fire, his body was muscular, and he had a stocky build. Just by standing there, he gave people a strong sense of oppression. He stared at Zhou Xuanji and said, "You are Sword God Zhou?" Zhou Xuanji asked, "Who are you?" "Meng clan, Meng Changhu, Great Zhou's second-rank general king. I feel that the bet between my nephew, Tianlang, and you should be discussed at length, so I came specially." The middle-aged man in black leaped up and landed in front of Zhou Xuanji and the others. His boldness was even stronger than Meng Tianlang's. Xiao Jinghong, Zhao Congjian, and Northern Sword Valiant were all prepared for battle. Fang Junsheng lowered his head and hid behind Huang Lianxin. He did not dare to look at Meng Changhu directly. I wasn't the one who forced him to make this bet, Zhou Xuanji said casually, which made Meng Changhu frown. He frowned, and the pressure grew stronger. He looked at Zhou Xuanji's face carefully. Suddenly, his expression changed slightly, and a strange look flashed in his eyes. If you have any requests, just tell me, Meng Changhu said calmly, but his eyes flickered with a strange look. There's no room for discussion, Zhou Xuanji replied. If he let this go, he would lose face. Okay. Meng Changhu flicked his sleeves and turned around. He pointed at Fang Junsheng and said, "You, come here. Follow me home. If your father knew that you are such a coward, your wives and concubines can forget about living." Fang Junsheng heard him and his expression changed drastically. He could only grit his teeth and walk up to him. Meng Changhu grabbed his shoulder and flew up to the clouds. Zhou Xuanji did not stop him. Fang Junsheng was not his sword slave yet, and Meng Changhu was not Fang Junsheng's enemy. He had no reason to stop him. Meng Changhu walked into the carriage, and the soldiers left on the clouds. Prince Xuanji, His Majesty was right. You will be the top prodigy in Great Zhou's history. You have perfectly inherited the royal bloodline of Great Zhou. But I have to give you a piece of advice. The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. Meng Changhu's voice came suddenly, and Zhou Xuanji's expression changed. The others did the same and looked at Zhou Xuanji. Chapter 84. Master. You are the Prince of Great Zhou? Zhao Congjian could not help but ask. His expression was complicated, and he could not help but think of Zhou Chengxin. If Zhou Chengxin knew Zhou Xuanji's identity, wouldn't he vomit blood? The powerful cultivator that he tried so hard to rope in was actually his brother. Xiao Jinghong was in deep thought. Beixiao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin were shocked, but they did not ask. Zhou Xuanji wanted to kill the Empress of Great Zhou, so why would it be impossible for him to be the Prince of Great Zhou? Little Jiang Shui looked at Zhou Xuanji worriedly. She knew what kind of danger he would face if his identity was exposed. Zhou Xuanji stared at the direction where Meng Changhu's group left and said calmly, "Yes, I am the son of Lady Zhao Xian, Zhou Xuanji." Lady Zhao Xian. Everyone's expression changed. They still remembered the shocking incident 11 years ago clearly. Back then, in order to search for Lady Zhao Xian and her son, Great Zhou went to great lengths. All the kingdoms helped, but both mother and son died in the end. I see, Huang Lianxin mumbled to herself. No wonder Zhou Xuanji wanted to kill the Empress of Great Zhou. All the questions were answered immediately. Back then, Emperor Yan of Zhou favored Lady Zhao Xian, which made the Empress jealous. It was not a secret. Xiao Jinghong squinted his eyes and said, back then, when revered teacher was just born, he was loved by the emperor. But Lady Zhao Xian's family rebelled at this time. There must be more to it than meets the eye. Beixiao Wangjian nodded and guessed, if they did not rebel, Lady Zhao Xian's family would have a meteoric rise. After the rebellion, the one who benefited the most was the Empress of Great Zhou. Zhao Congjian walked up to Zhou Xuanji and half-knelt. I will definitely kill my way into the Great Zhou royal palace for master and avenge you. Although he was a sword slave, Zhou Xuanji treated him just as well as Xiao Jinghong. He never treated him harshly. He did not express his feelings, but he remembered them in his heart. Beixiao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin saw this and knelt down as well. We will go through fire and water for master. Wherever master goes, I will go. Even if there is a slim chance of survival. Both of them looked resolute and fearless. Xiao Jinghong knelt down as well and cupped his fists. a teacher for a day is a teacher for life. Now that I, Xiao Jinghong, have acknowledged you as my master, your matters are my matters. Even if the enemy is the Emperor of Great Zhou, I will definitely stand before you. Looking at the 4 people in front of him, Zhou Xuanji felt a little teary. Other than Jiang Shui, he didn't expect to get 4 other people who would risk their lives for him. He laughed heroically and said, "What are you doing? Hurry up and get up. I value my life more than you do. I won't bring you to your deaths." The atmosphere was no longer tense. Everyone smiled and stood up. Jiang Shui smiled and said, "With Xuanji's talent, it will be easy for him to take revenge in the future." Zhou Xuanji nodded and smiled, "We promise to travel the world together. Master, let's make a deal. After you get your revenge, we'll go to the Holy Land of the Sword, 10,000 Swords Divine Mountain. How about that?" Xiao Jinghong smiled as a yearning look appeared on his face. Zhao Zongjian's eyes brightened, "The legendary 10,000 Swords Divine Ridge? It really exists?" Xiao Jinghong nodded. Jiang Shui, Beixiao Wangjian, and Huang Lianxin were all curious. They did not know much about the Northern Wilderness region. Not to mention the Northern Wilderness region, they had not even explored the entire Great Zhou dynasty. Zhou Xuanji laughed and said, "Go. Of course. In the future, wherever you want to go, we will go." The group looked at each other and laughed. Even in the face of the Empress' threat, they still laughed heartily. After chatting for a while, they decided to leave this place. Since Meng Changhu could recognize Zhou Xuanji's identity, it meant danger. Who knew which faction Meng Changhu belonged to? Now that the ascension of Emperor Yan of Zhou was getting closer, the fight for the throne was getting more and more intense. Zhou Xuanji did not want to die recklessly. He could not just shout, "I'm the Prince of Great Zhou, Zhou Xuanji." If he did so, he would die even faster. After all, Zhou Yalong had the highest chance of becoming the emperor. He had already won over half of the royal court, and the empress was even more powerful in the royal palace. Even though Emperor Yan of Zhou had great powers, it was extremely difficult for Zhou Xuanji to appear before him. Wu, a big roared in the sky, and the group flew on their swords. Jiang Shui hugged Zhou Xuanji's waist, while the 3-eyed drought rodent was in his arms. The little black snake laid on the 3-eyed drought rodent's head and exclaimed, "Impressive. I didn't expect you to be a prince of the Great Zhou dynasty, and of the royal bloodline of the Great Zhou dynasty. Your father is a top-notch almighty in the Northern Wilderness region, and he is world-shaking." It talked endlessly as if it was Emperor Yan of Zhou's son. Zhou Xuanji ignored it and headed deeper into the immortal Sundering Mountain range. Along the way, they encountered many cultivators. Seeing Zhou Xuanji, those cultivators could not contain their excitement and continuously cried out. They flew for 1,000 li. Zhou Xuanji learned a lot of news. He was already ranked 3rd on the Great Zhou honor ranking. It even overshadowed the brilliance of Great Zhou's heaven selection. Defeating Meng Tianlang was not enough to cause such a stir. It was mainly because of the accumulation of his previous achievements. The Demon Emperor's son, North Zhou Gale Sword, Zhao Zongjian, Xie Zong, Meng Tianlang, Sword God Zhou, who appeared out of nowhere, was already a legend in the eyes of the people. He was an undefeated legend. How powerful was Meng Tianlang? He was defeated by a single sword strike and almost died. How powerful was Sword God Zhou? Within Great Zhou, it was widely believed that Sword God Zhou had already surpassed the astral infant stage. There were very few experts who surpassed the nascent soul realm, and it was difficult for a dynasty to produce one in 1,000 years. Even within the dynasty, they would be top experts and would be roped in by the court. TSK, if this continues, will people think that you are more powerful than the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou? Jiang Shui rested her chin on Zhou Xuanji's shoulder and asked with a smile. The strong wind messed up her hair, and she could only squint her eyes. Even so, she was still beautiful. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, "Sword God and Sword Monarch, who's more powerful? Can't you tell from their names?" "Bullshit, but you'll definitely be stronger than him in the future." Jiang Shui pinched Zhou Xuanji's face and giggled. "Hey hey hey. I'm flying on my sword. Be careful not to get into an accident." Zhou Xuanji cried out loudly, which frightened Jiang Shui so much that she immediately stopped. The others were also laughing. Thinking back to that sword strike from that day, they still felt amazed. They traveled for 7 days. The group found a valley that was open and surrounded by mountains. There was a lake, flowers, and trees in the valley. It was suitable for living. After checking in, everyone continued to cultivate. Zhou Xuanji's goal was to break through to Inner Pellet as soon as possible. Next, every month, he would send Xiao Jinghong and Zhao Congjian out to find out about the Empress' visit to Merciful Melody Cliff. One thing was for sure. Before Great Zhou's heaven selection ended, the Empress, as the mother of the empire, would not go out. 4 months later, Zhou Xuanji successfully broke through to enlightening level 10. At the same time, Jiang Shui and Huang Lianxin reached foundation building level 10. Beixiao Wangjian received a lot of resources and reached enlightening level 8. Zhao Congjian received a year of guidance from Zhou Xuanji and began to break through to Soul Fountain. The entire group was becoming more powerful quickly. This day, Great Zhou's heaven selection's first round ended. Great Zhou's army retreated from Immortal Sundering Mountain. Immortal Sundering Mountain welcomed peace. The demons no longer hid and came out to roam the world. Whoosh, in the valley, Zhou Xuanji, who was cultivating, felt a gust of cold wind. Immortal Sundering Mountain was like spring all year round, and it was rare to have such a cold wind. He looked up instinctively, and his expression changed. He saw a silhouette standing on the top of a mountain. The sun shone above his head, and no one could see his face clearly. Chapter 85. There's someone. Everyone, be careful. Xiao Jinghong's voice came from a tree not far away. Zhao Congjian and Beixiao Wangjian, whom he was teaching, turned around as well. Jiang Shui and Huang Lianxin, who were bathing the dragon eagles by the lake, also became alert. The little black snake, who was sleeping soundly on the three-eyed drought rodent's head, quivered and raised its head to look. His Majesty said that you were the chosen one, but you died at the age of 2 and became a joke. I didn't expect you to still be alive. An old voice sounded. His tone was indifferent, and it was impossible to tell what he was feeling. Zhou Xuanji's heart trembled. People from the Great Zhou Empire? Before he could say anything, Xiao Jinghong asked, "Who exactly are you, and why have you come here?" "Sword King Xiao Jinghong. You're quite a character, but it's a pity that you followed the wrong person. The world will belong to the second prince in the future. Zhao Xian's son must die." The ancient voice came again. After that, he leaped up and dived down toward Zhou Xuanji. He rushed out of the sunlight and revealed his true self. He was dressed in a loose black robe, and his face was like an eagle's. His white hair fluttered in the wind, and he was like an evil demon that had been born. Zhou Xuanji took out the Hell King sword and Thunderclap sword and prepared to fight. Xiao Jinghong's treasured sword shot towards the black-robed elder like a sharp arrow. "Master, this person is also at the nascent soul realm. Leave him to me." Xiao Jinghong bellowed and leaped into the air. He took out another sword and slashed at the black-robed old man. After the black-robed old man dodged the incoming sword, he flipped his right hand, and a black wooden scepter appeared in his hand. The top of the scepter looked like a scorched claw, and it was horrifying. The scepter and the sword clashed together, causing sparks to fly and an ear-piercing sound. Xiao Jinghong turned around and caught the other sword with his left hand. Wielding his sword with both hands, he moved like a swallow and fought fiercely with the black-robed old man in the air. The two of them attacked extremely quickly, and even Zhou Xuanji was dazzled by their movements. Zhao Congjian looked at the sky with a burning gaze. This guy had forgotten about the danger. He only felt excited and wanted to learn something. Xiao Jinghong's swords were like the wind, and his attacks were swift and fierce, similar to Zhou Xuanji's style. The black-robed old man held the scepter in his hand, and strands of evil qi seeped out from the scepter, turning into numerous ghost heads that surrounded Xiao Jinghong. Compared to Xiao Jinghong, the black-robed old man's movements were bold and majestic, and he had the aura of a general. Zhou Xuanji frowned slightly. He could tell that Xiao Jinghong did not have the upper hand. From the looks of it, this person was at the peak of the nascent soul realm. Jiang Shui walked to Zhou Xuanji's side and took out the flaming fan. "Do we need help?" Zhou Xuanji said, "We can't interfere. Let's not give him more trouble." He was somewhat moved that Xiao Jinghong would still stand up for the experts of the great Zhou Empire. Now that he thought about it, Xiao Jinghong had already helped him several times before he had mastered the dual sword intent that he had taught him. To have such a disciple was the greatest fortune of his life. The battle continued. The black-robed elder's aura grew stronger and stronger. Even though Xiao Jinghong kept switching his sword intents, he was still unable to gain the upper hand. The two of them continued to fight along the mountain wall, causing rocks to fall from the mountain. If they continued to fight like this, they would probably fill up the entire valley. "Xiao Jinghong, you are indeed powerful. But when I was young, I was ranked in the top 5 of Great Zhou's hero ranking board. Now that I am 7 levels higher than you, you are no match for me." The black-robed elder snorted coldly. His tone was filled with coldness and murderous intent. After he spoke, he leaped up abruptly and shook off Xiao Jinghong. A billowing black wind came out from his sleeves and circled around his body, forming into a black dragon that was hundreds of meters long. It roared furiously and shook the heavens and the earth. The little black snake opened its eyes wide at this scene and said with a trembling voice, "Dragon Soul. This old guy is so lucky." Next, the black-robed elder entered the black dragon's head. The black dragon twisted its body and charged toward Xiao Jinghong with an unstoppable force. Swoosh! 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 Xiao Jinghong did not panic at all. He danced with his sword on the spot, and streaks of sword shadows appeared out of nowhere. In an instant, tens of thousands of sword shadows appeared around him. He stabbed with his sword, and all the sword shadows shot out simultaneously. It was like a powerful current crashing into the black dragon. Boom! The surrounding mountains shook violently. The trees swayed, and a violent gale blew. Zhou Xuanji looked up at this scene with squinted eyes. He looked calm, but he was actually worried for Xiao Jinghong. At the same time, he was looking for an opportunity to deal a fatal blow to the black-robed elder. Soon, Xiao Jinghong's sword shadows were torn apart by the black dragon. The black dragon crashed into Xiao Jinghong's face, and the horrifying force caused Xiao Jinghong to vomit blood immediately. His body smashed into the mountain wall like a cannonball and disappeared. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. The black-robed elder stood high above. He turned to look at Zhou Xuanji and said, "Prince Xuanji, remember, the person who captured you is called Qin Chitsuan. Come with me to see the Empress." He charged toward Zhou Xuanji suddenly, and the black dragon followed him. Its 100-meter-long body was awe-inspiring and gave off an unstoppable aura. Clang! Clang! Xiao Jinghong suddenly appeared in front of the black dragon and stabbed with both swords. The swords pierced through the black dragon's head and into Qin Chitsuan's shoulders. So fast! Zhao Congjian opened his eyes wide and cried out in disbelief. He did not see Xiao Jinghong's movement trajectory at all. Qin Chitsuan was shocked too. He saw that Xiao Jinghong was surrounded by two types of sword wills, one green and one white, each occupying half of his body. The sword qi was visible to the naked eye. He stared at Qin Chitsuan coldly, as though he was looking at a dead man. This is, two types of sword wills? How can it be? Qin Chitsuan cried out in shock. He suddenly remembered that sword god Zhou was proficient in dual sword wills. Xiao Jinghong learned dual sword wills by following sword god Zhou? Before he could think further, Xiao Jinghong relied on dual sword wills and unleashed an unprecedented attack, which forced him back step by step. He learned dual sword wills, Beixiao Wangjian mumbled to himself. His tone was a little bitter. This was his talent. Comparing oneself to others would only make one angry. Zhou Xuanji shook his head slightly. He could tell that Xiao Jinghong only broke through in the face of danger, and his dual sword wills were not stable. After being slashed by Xiao Jinghong for dozens of times, Qin Chitsuan was covered in blood. He went completely berserk and roared. The black dragon materialized again and grew even bigger. Xiao Jinghong stepped back suddenly. He held the sword in his right hand in front of him and the sword in his left hand behind his back. The blade was pointed at the center of his brows. His eyes were cold and sharp, and he was prepared to kill Qin Chitsuan in one strike. The two sword wills transformed into green and white flames, and his aura grew even more powerful. Swoosh! He transformed into a beam of light that alternated between green and white and charged toward Qin Chitsuan. Boom! The black dragon collapsed, and Xiao Jinghong's swords pierced through Qin Chitsuan's abdomen. Blood splattered. The black-robed old man hit Xiao Jinghong's back with his staff, and the sound of bones breaking was extremely clear. Next, Qin Chitsuan slammed into the mountain wall, while Xiao Jinghong fell to the bottom of the valley. The impact swept up a cloud of dust. Zhou Xuanji and the others immediately surrounded him. Xiao Jinghong coughed up blood continuously and no longer had the strength to stand up. Almost. Damn, Xiao Jinghong said with dissatisfaction. He spoke with great difficulty. Zhou Xuanji squatted in front of him and said, "You have done well." His opponent was not an ordinary person. It was not easy for Xiao Jinghong to injure him so severely. At this moment, a horrifying aura exploded from the mountain wall. A black dragon emerged from the hole in the mountain wall. Qin Chitsuan, who was covered in blood, flew out slowly. His face was hideous. He covered his abdomen with his left hand, and blood gushed out from between his fingers. Xiao Jinghong. I'm going to make you wish you were dead but unable to. Qin Chitsuan roared with gritted teeth. His eyes were filled with madness. Everyone was shocked and got up to fight. Zhou Xuanji took a step forward and said, "Take good care of him." After that, strands of black qi came out from the Hell King's sword and formed into the Hell King, which attached itself to his body. The thunderclap sword emitted lightning that surrounded the Hell King, which looked like the god of thunder. Chapter 86. Seeing the Hell King's image on Zhou Xuanji's body, Qin Chitsuan was shocked in his heart. But Zhou Xuanji did not even have the cultivation of inner pellet. Even though he was heavily injured, he could not defeat him. He laughed disdainfully and said, "What? Is Prince Xuanji prepared to fight to the death?" The princes of the great Zhou dynasty were extremely noble. Now that he could personally torture Emperor Yan of Zhou's beloved son, he felt somewhat excited. Zhou Xuanji coldly looked at him, and legendary swords appeared behind him. Crimson Dragon Sword, Frost Wave Sword, Bloodbath Sword, Tiger Roar Sword, Wind Cutter Sword, Swine Culling Sword, Golden Rock Sword, Heaven Sound Sword, Afterimage Sword, Formless Sword, Furious Ape Sword, Chicken Slaying Sword, Water Driving Sword. Zhao Congjian, Beishao Wangjian, Xiao Jinghong, and Huang Lianxin were all stunned. Not just 10 swords. Qin Shizuan's laughter became even more arrogant as he said disdainfully, no matter how many swords there are, it's all futile. After saying this, he bent down and charged forward. The massive black dragon bore down on Zhou Xuanji like a mountain. With the Hell King sword and Thunderclap sword in hand, Zhou Xuanji bent his legs and charged forward with the other 13 legendary swords. The Crimson Dragon sword vibrated, and a Crimson Dragon soul roared out. The Frost Wave sword trembled and waves of cold air shot out. The Tiger Roar sword let out a tiger roar, the Heavenly Sound sword let out a series of bewildering sounds, the Afterimage sword turned into countless afterimages, and the Furious Ape sword roared. It was just one person, but he had the power of a magnificent army, shaking the entire valley. Qin Shizuan's expression changed slightly. In his eyes, Zhou Xuanji's speed suddenly increased. At this moment, Zhou Xuanji could no longer be measured by the enlightening stage. He was the Netherworld King. The soul of the Crimson Dragon collided with the Black Dragon first. Although it was torn apart by the Black Dragon, it also caused the Black Dragon to pause for a moment. Zhou Xuanji activated Vibrant Raindrop Sword Will and Tempest/Sword Will. His speed was extremely fast. The two swords emerged together and pierced through the Black Dragon's body as he charged toward Qin Shizuan. Qin Shizuan had been severely injured by Xiao Jinghong, so his strength was no longer at its peak. He subconsciously swung his scepter, but the two gold-ranked divine swords directly broke his scepter. Impossible. Qin Shizuan was greatly shocked in his heart. This was a 5th-tier transcendent-grade magic tool. How could it be so weak? The Hell King sword and the Thunderclap sword pierced his chest. Lightning exploded and wreaked havoc on his body, causing him to raise his head and scream in pain. How dare you bully my disciple? I want to see who will suffer a fate worse than death. Zhou Xuanji's face was cold. He pulled his hands outward and slashed horizontally with both swords, tearing open Qin Shizuan's chest. Blood splattered across the sky. Subsequently, the other 13 divine swords revealed their divine might in succession. Sword lights flickered as they slashed and slashed madly, and Qin Shizuan was like a wooden stake that was slashed to the point his flesh and blood splattered in all directions. It was an extremely miserable scene. The unimaginable pain almost made him faint. He abruptly transformed into a cloud of black mist and dissipated on the spot, appearing out of thin air on the mountain wall 100 feet away. He breathed heavily, his eyes bloodshot. He was no longer a perfect person, looking horrifying and terrifying. Who are you? How dare you possess Prince Xuanji's body? Qin Shizuan stared at Zhou Xuanji and asked with difficulty. No matter how devilish Zhou Xuanji was, it was impossible for him to be so powerful. It was completely illogical. Little did he know that his guess was only half correct. Zhou Xuanji did not possess someone else's body and reincarnate, but he retained the memories of his previous life. Remember, I have another name, Sword God Zhou, the god of the sword's way. Zhou Xuanji cried out coldly. He could tell that Qin Shizuan, who was severely injured, could be killed. Since he could kill him, then he had to act tough. After that, he activated the Trisource Vein-Severing Sword. Countless sword chi surged out and drowned Qin Shizuan. Boom! 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 The mountain wall exploded. Countless rocks fell down, and a cloud of dust swept up. Ah, Sword God Zhou! Zhou Xuanji! You will die a horrible death. Her Majesty the Empress will send even more experts to capture you. She will make you suffer a fate worse than death, just like your damned grandfather. Qin Shizuan cried out hoarsely. His tone was filled with hatred. Soon, his voice stopped. He was dead. Swoosh! A baby shrouded in black light suddenly rushed out of the rubble and dust, flying towards the sky at high speed. Astral infant. Zhou Xuanji's eyes focused and threw out the bloodbath sword straightaway. Ranged sword propelling. It could slash an enemy from 100 miles away. Just when Qin Chitsuan's astral infant flew over the mountain, the gold-grade legendary sword slashed toward it. Like a flying knife cutting a watermelon, Qin Chitsuan's astral infant was slashed into pieces. Zhou Xuanji, who was standing on the formless sword, levitated in the air like a celestial being. His body was surrounded by legendary swords. He looked upward, at the place where blood bloomed. The bloodbath sword circled in the air and flew toward Zhou Xuanji. This scene was like a painting. It shocked Jiang Shui, Xiao Jinghong, Zhao Congjian, Beixiao Wangjian, Huang Lianxin, and the little black snake. Even the three-eyed drought rodent, big, and small air's eyes were beaming. How domineering! Jiang Shui mumbled, my Xuanji has really grown up. Xiao Jinghong was dazzled. He could not imagine such a scene in his entire life. Zhou Xuanji stored his sword and landed in front of Xiao Jinghong. He stared at Beixiao Wangjian and said, hurry up and heal him. Beixiao Wangjian came back to his senses and quickly took out some pills. Zhou Xuanji looked at Zhao Congjian and said, go and search. See if the old man left anything behind. Yes. Zhao Congjian held back his excitement and left. Jiang Shui walked up to Zhou Xuanji and patted off the dust on his body. Xuanji, you are so awesome, she said with an excited smile. Ever since Zhou Xuanji's identity was exposed, she addressed him as Xuanji without holding back. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, haven't I always been awesome? Jiang Shui nodded heavily. She could not stop the smile on her face. Huang Lianxin sighed in amazement, you even killed an astral infant. I feel that no matter how powerful the enemy is, Master has a way to deal with them. The three-eyed drought rodent ran over with the little black snake and jumped onto Zhou Xuanji's shoulder. The little black snake said excitedly, I'm really convinced. Little brat, I will follow you from now on. Can you treat me better? Zhou Xuanji ignored it and said to Xiao Jinghong, I comprehended dual sword wills during this crisis, but it's not stable enough. You have to practice more in the future. After Xiao Jinghong consumed the pills, he had recovered much of his qi and blood. He tried his best to squeeze out a smile and said, your disciple will remember. Soon, Zhao Congjian returned with 3 storage rings. Once Qin Chitsuan died, his soul imprint disappeared from the rings, so they were ownerless. Zhou Xuanji inspected them and said without a smile, not bad. Pack up and get ready to leave Immortal Sundering Mountain. Jiang Shui asked, where are we going? Zhou Xuanji said, to the border of Great Zhou and wait for the Empress to leave the court. No one had any objections. 4 hours later, Xiao Jinghong's injuries were mostly healed, and they left. Zhou Xuanji and Jiang Shui rode on Big's back, while Huang Lianxin rode on Small Air's back. The others flew on their swords. After they left the valley, Zhou Xuanji first recovered the spiritual qi in his body. He flipped his right hand and took out the furious ape sword. He tilted his head and instructed, look after me. If I need anything, help me immediately. Don't let me fall. Jiang Shui, who was hugging his waist, asked in confusion, what are you going to do? Zhou Xuanji said calmly, charge up and wait for the dogs to come. Chapter 87. A violent gale blew against Zhou Xuanji's face, and his hands felt a little sore. He had been holding the sword for 3 days and 3 nights. Every time he stopped to rest, he had to rely on Jiang Shui's support. Zhao Congjian flew to Ada and asked, Master, how much longer are you going to hold it up? Jiang Shui poured out the pill and fed it to Zhou Xuanji personally. Zhou Xuanji said calmly, don't ask so much. You will understand later. Zhao Zongjian became even more curious. He thought about the scene when Zhou Xuanji was dealing with Meng Tianlang and understood something. He took a deep look at the furious ape sword, then he rode his sword to increase the distance between them. Xiao Jinghong smiled and said, "There are great mountains and rivers in front of us. My appointment with Meng Tianlang at the border is coming soon. Wait for my good news then." Northern Sword Valiant followed behind him and asked in surprise, "Are we not allowed to follow?" Zhao Zongjian, Huang Lianxin, and Jiang Shui all looked towards Xiao Jinghong. Xiao Jinghong shook his head and said, "You can't. This battle has long been known to the public, and the great Zhou dynasty is secretly promoting it to pave the way for Meng Tianlang. If Master goes, you will definitely run into Zhou Yalong and the Empress's minions. It will be very dangerous, and even 10 of me would not be able to withstand it." Everyone came to a realization. Zhou Xuanji glanced at Xiao Jinghong and asked, "If you win, will there be any trouble?" Between Xiao Jinghong and Meng Tianlang, who was stronger? As a master, he naturally trusted his disciple unconditionally. With Laozi's dual sword will here, how can a mere Meng Tianlang be enough to kill? Xiao Jinghong laughed and said, "Does the great Zhou dare to touch me in front of everyone?" Even in this immortal-like world, most people still cared about their face. The higher one stood, the more they cared about their face. Everyone smiled at each other and continued forward. For the next 7 days, they did not encounter any trouble. Zhou Xuanji's face was pale. With Jiang Shui's nourishment, his spirit energy was not depleted. However, he had been accumulating power for 10 days, and his arms were really sore. "Damn it, did I miscalculate?" Zhou Xuanji mumbled, and Jiang Shui, who was behind him, could not help but giggle. She reached out to massage his arm and said with a smile, "Isn't it good to miscalculate? What if you get injured during the fighting?" Zhou Xuanji sighed. Jiang Shui was right. However, he inexplicably hoped that there would be enemies and that he would be able to seize the treasure. "No. I can't have such thoughts. In this world, one cannot rely on surfing." Time passed. Another 10 days passed. Zhou Xuanji charged up for 20 days. He could sense the horrifying energy contained in the furious ape sword, which was enough to destroy the world. If Meng Tianlang came again, he would definitely tear him to pieces. Xiao Jinghong fully recovered with the help of some healing pills. He glanced at the furious ape sword in Zhou Xuanji's hand and swallowed his saliva. Back then, how long did Zhou Xuanji wait to kill Meng Tianlang? It was too scary. Xiao Jinghong sympathized with those who were about to kill Zhou Xuanji. "Master, there is still half a day before we leave the great Zhou dynasty." Zhao Zongjian turned around and said. He could not help but glance at the furious ape sword. After all, Xiao Jinghong was even more frightening to him. Zhou Xuanji's face was covered in sweat and his face was pale. His arms trembled continuously. If not for Jiang Shui's support, he would have fallen long ago. At first glance, he thought that Zhou Xuanji was dying. Zhou Xuanji squeezed out a smile and said, "So soon? What a pity." When everyone heard this, they burst into laughter, holding their bellies. 2 hours later, they passed by Wuxia city. The city was not big, and they would reach the border pass of Great Zhou in a few dozen miles. Looking at the bustling streets below, Beishao Wangjian sighed, "If it were me in the past, I would definitely like to stay in a crowded city. But now, I like the feeling of running around." Zhao Zongjian smiled and said, "Or else, how can there be so many tourists in the world?" The group was chatting and laughing, and they did not look like they were running for their lives. They were about to pass by Wuxia city. "Sword God Zhou. Stop right there. You killed the 3rd grade royal guard, Qin Chitsuan. Today, we will uphold the dignity of Great Zhou. A roar suddenly came from behind him. Everyone turned to look, only to see a burly man wearing heavy tiger head armor leading a group of tigers and wolves soaring through the clouds. At a glance, there were at least 300 of them. The hundreds of thousands of people in Wuxia city were stunned. Sword God Zhou? He killed the third-grade royal guard, Qin Chitsuan? Xiao Jinghong's expression changed and cried out, "Oh no! It's Tai Yulong. His cultivation is at Astral Infant level 10, only one step away from astral projection. The royal soldiers behind him are all elites, all at Soul Fountain." The group heard him, and their expressions changed drastically. Only Zhou Xuanji was excited. He said with a trembling voice, "Quick, help me up." Seeing this group of people, he almost cried. "Oh my God! You are finally here." Jiang Shui quickly helped him up. Seeing that Tai Yulong and the 300 royal soldiers were getting closer, Zhou Xuanji's lips began to tremble. If they did not come soon, he would not be able to hold on any longer. He held his sword with both hands and shouted at Tai Yulong and the others, "Sword God Zhou, have never offended the great Zhou Empire. The Empress sent people to kill me for no reason. Is there still justice in Great Zhou?" With so many people below, it was a good opportunity to pour cold water on the Empress. After that, Zhou Xuanji slashed furiously. This slash was accompanied by the roar of an ancient furious ape, which shocked the heavens and the earth and made the gods weep. It was such an exhilarating slash. I held it in for 20 days. A whole 20 days. The roar of the ancient furious ape was so deafening that everyone felt dizzy and their ears were ringing. It was as though the sun and moon had turned upside down and the mountains and rivers were shaking. A horrifying sword chi that was hundreds of meters long shot out with unparalleled speed. It swept across the distance of 1,000 meters in an instant. In the eyes of the hundreds of thousands of people in Wuxia city, it was as though a white crescent moon swept across Tai Yulong and the others with a powerful gale. In an instant, Tai Yulong and the 300 royal soldiers turned into ashes. They were dead. Even Tai Yulong's astral infant could not escape in time. The sword chi was unstoppable. It soared into the sky and traveled for 10 miles, slicing off a tall mountain behind Wuxia city. The mountain rocks collapsed and shook the heavens and earth. Everyone was dumbfounded. They could not believe their eyes. Even Xiao Jinghong, Zhao Zongjian, and the others opened their mouths wide. Their eyes were about to fall out. Jiang Shui, who was supporting Zhou Xuanji, was also stunned. This slash was too powerful. Was this something a human could do? Oh God! The heavens and earth were silent, so silent that it was terrifying. Zhou Xuanji panted and maintained his posture of swinging his sword. Big's wings flapped continuously. But, he felt a little pain on his head and a little cold. The slash just now had shaved off the hair on his head. Zhou Xuanji did not notice his beloved pet's embarrassment. He cried out proudly, "The Empress of Great Zhou is only a so-so. First, she killed Lady Zhao Xian and her son, then she killed me for no reason. Is this how the mother of Great Zhou should behave? What a joke! What a big joke! I, Sword God Zhou, despise such people the most." After that, he said softly to Xiao Jinghong and the others, "Let's go." Big and Small Air immediately flapped their wings and flew away. The others followed on their swords. The group flew quickly toward Great Zhou's border. After a period of silence, Wuxia city exploded. The cries of hundreds of thousands of people gathered together, as though the sky was about to be turned upside down. Oh my God! Sword God! He's definitely the Sword God. The famous Tai Yulong died just like that? The Empress of Great Zhou is so vicious? She dared to harm me, Sword God Zhou? Is there any justice in this world? That slash just now. Did I see it wrong? So horrifying. It's not something a human can do. It's a god. A god. Chapter 88. After a full-powered slash, Zhou Xuanji became a cripple. However, with Xiao Jinghong and Zhao Congjian in front of them, they forced their way out of the great border pass and disappeared into the vast forest without a trace. The news of sword god Zhou killing Tai Yulong and 300 royal soldiers with a single strike was like a nuclear bomb exploding. It spread like wildfire to the cities around Wuxia city. In less than 3 days, the news had spread throughout the great Zhou dynasty. 5 days later, even the dynasties under the great Zhou dynasty were discussing this matter. The name of sword god Zhou was known by the whole world. Meanwhile, Zhou Xuanji and the others came to a place where demons roamed freely and humans were rarely seen. "Master, doesn't this look like the place where we first met?" Xiao Jinghong asked with a smile. Zhou Xuanji, who was being supported by Jiang Shui, nodded. He looked around, took a deep breath, and sighed, "Although the landscape of the mountains and rivers is similar, we have all changed. Fortunately, we have not dispersed yet." Xiao Jinghong couldn't help but sigh. Thinking back to the past and looking at the present, he had more emotions than Zhao Congjian and the others. Northern Sword Valiant laughed, "If I don't master dual sword wills, I won't drink anymore." Huang Lianxin covered her mouth and giggled. "Your wine has been taken by master. You can't drink it even if you wanted to." Zhao Congjian looked at Xiao Jinghong and said, "My goal is to surpass you." Xiao Jinghong smiled and said, "Then you have to work harder." Jiang Shui pointed at the mountain in front of them and said, "Let's stay on the hillside in front. There's a river in the west and a boundless forest in the north. We can have anything we want. Isn't that great?" Compared to the bustling dynasties, she preferred this desolate and uninhabited place. Humans were always more terrifying than demons. Zhou Xuanji said weakly, "It's up to you. Help me sit down." He wailed in his heart. In the future, he could not casually accumulate power for a long period of time. Swinging the sword felt good for a moment, but afterward, his legs turned to jelly. Hearing this, everyone laughed and continued to walk towards the hillside in front of them. The hill was 100 meters tall and 300 meters wide, and there was a small cliff behind it. For Zhou Xuanji and the others, they would not fall to their deaths. Jiang Shui helped Zhou Xuanji to a rock and sat him down. Jiang Shui took out a small stove and prepared to brew some tonic for him. "Wu, not far away," the Baldavita called out in a low voice. He and Little Fool were crouching on the ground, squeezing each other's bodies. It really seemed like they were wronged. Zhou Xuanji stared at it and scolded unpleasantly, "It's just a few strands of fur, is there a need to do this? When I, your master, swing my sword, don't you know to lower your head?" Ada felt even more wronged and buried his head in the grass. At this moment, the little black snake dragged the sleeping three-eyed drought rodent over with difficulty. It smiled coyly and said, "Master, when will you start helping me become stronger?" Ever since that 5 days ago, it did not even dare to call itself "I" in front of Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji was very tired and was not in a good mood. He waved his hand and said, "We'll talk about it in the future. Perform well. I'm not keeping you alive just to torture you." When the little black snake heard this, it was instantly overjoyed. It shut its mouth and didn't say anything else. It was in a good mood and felt that a beautiful future was right in front of it. In the following period of time, there were no more attacks from the great Zhou dynasty. After all, they had already left the great Zhou dynasty and no one knew where they were. Only after 13 days did Zhou Xuanji fully recover. The lively feeling made him even more determined to not be too reckless in the future. 2 months later. It was Zhou Xuanji's 14th birthday. Analyze that the sword owner has reached 14 years old. Gotcha started. Ding. Congratulations, the sword owner obtained, silver, falcon sword, silver, magnetic sword, gold, ghost curse sword. Zhou Xuanji, who was cultivating, opened his eyes wide. 3 legendary swords? Interesting. And a gold-grade legendary sword. Did the Supreme Legendary Sword system level up? It's getting more and more generous. Zhou Xuanji took advantage of the situation and immediately took out 3 legendary swords. At the same time, lines of words appeared before his eyes: sword name, falcon sword grade, silver description. The sword is like a flying eagle, sharp and powerful. The cry of the eagle can intimidate the enemy and deter evil. Sword name, magnetic sword grade, silver description. It was forged with goblin magnetic iron and contains powerful suction force. Sword name, ghost curse sword grade, gold description. It was formed by thousands of evil spirits. Those who are pierced by the sword will be cursed by evil spirits. They all looked good. He got 2 more legendary swords with special effects. Zhou Xuanji smiled satisfactorily and looked at the 3 legendary swords. The falcon sword was a silver sword. The hilt looked like a majestic eagle with its wings spread. The magnetic sword was an earthy gold color. Compared to the falcon sword, it looked ordinary. The ghost curse sword was just like its name. It was filled with an evil aura. The blade was black, and there were 3 small ghost heads on the hilt. It looked like an evil sword at first glance. Compared to the bloodbath sword, it was even more evil. At this moment, Xiao Jinghong walked over. He glanced at the 3 legendary swords in front of Zhou Xuanji and calmly looked away. He smiled and said, "Revered teacher, it's time for me to depart. The border custom war is in a month's time. I need to retrieve my 2 beloved swords first." Zhou Xuanji stored the 3 legendary swords into the supreme storage and smiled. "Yo, you even hid your powerful treasures?" Xiao Jinghong shook his head and said, "I only immersed them in molten iron deep in the mountains for 10 years. The power of the swords must have grown a lot." Zhou Xuanji nodded and waved his hand, saying, "Go and bid farewell to them. I will wait here for your triumphant return." Xiao Jinghong cupped his fist with a smile and left. After a while, Xiao Jinghong left on his sword. Northern Sword Valiant walked over and squatted beside Zhou Xuanji. "Master, is the young master really at ease this time?" he asked. Xiao Jinghong was Zhou Xuanji's disciple. Northern Sword Valiant, Zhao Congjian, and Huang Lianxin all addressed him as their young master. Of course, this address was arranged by Zhou Xuanji. Everyone had their own theories. Zhou Xuanji closed his eyes to cultivate and said casually, "He's not a child. He's not going to brave mountains of blades or seas of fire. He's going to fight for fame." Northern Sword Valiant felt that it made sense, so he did not disturb Zhou Xuanji anymore. After internalizing qi for 2 hours, Zhou Xuanji got up and took out his new legendary swords to practice a set of sword techniques. Once the ghost curse sword was drawn, it was filled with an evil aura, which attracted the attention of others. Zhou Xuanji held the sword and swung it. It was as though countless evil spirits were surrounding him, which was even more terrifying than Qin Qitsuan. "Master really has all kinds of swords," Zhao Congjian said enviously. Although he wanted to learn the 10,000 sword dragon incantation, the dual sword wills gave him a headache. He decided to give up in the end. Zhou Xuanji was right. Everyone's way of the sword is destined. It can't be forced. Only the sword that suits you is the best. Huang Lianxin, who was feeding the little black snake, looked up and said, "It might have been left behind by Lady Zhao Xian, master." As the most favored imperial concubine of Great Zhou, it was not impossible for Lady Zhao Xian to have collected many famous swords. The little black snake spat its forked tongue and sighed, "Ghost sword. This is bad. If we are discovered by the ghost gate, it will be another disaster." Zhou Xuanji had already agreed to help it grow stronger. What it ate now were all natural treasures and elixirs. All of them were great nourishment. "What is the ghost gate?" Huang Lianxin asked curiously. Chapter 89. The little black snake raised its head and said proudly, "Give me another 300-year-old ginseng and a 50-year-old hen. I want to drink the soup." Huang Lianxin stared at it and took away the iron bowl in front of it straightaway. She left quickly. The little black snake panicked and quickly chased after her. "Little girl. Don't rush. I'll tell you. I'll tell you now." However, it was still tied to the three-eyed drought rodent and could not keep up with Huang Lianxin. In the next month, Zhou Xuanji began to break through to the inner pellet stage. Once he broke through to the inner pellet stage, his spirit energy would increase tremendously. At the same time, he could fly in the air. Qin Chitsuan was really rich. The pills, spirit stones, and rare resources in his storage ring were enough for him to spend freely. There were also many energy techniques and enchanted artifacts. He let Beishao Wangjian, Zhao Congjian, and Huang Lianxin pick 3 each. Jiang Shui picked 5, while Xiao Jinghong picked 6. When Zhou Xuanji began to break through to the inner pellet stage, Jiang Shui began to break through to the enlightening stage too. Although Huang Lianxin was at foundation building level 10, she was a step slower. Looking at Zhou Xuanji and Jiang Shui, who were internalizing qi on the hill, Zhao Congjian shook his head and laughed. Beishao Wangjian, who was training in front of him, asked curiously, "What are you laughing at?" Zhao Congjian drew his sword and said, "Our little mistress is quite talented. She reached the enlightening stage at 18. It will not be a problem for her to enter Great Zhou's hero ranking board. I'm exclaiming at our master." Beishao Wangjian stopped and asked, "What's wrong with our master?" Zhao Congjian said, "Look carefully. Our master's back is facing the sun, and there's a purple qi rising." Beishao Wangjian turned around and looked. He realized that there was indeed a faint purple qi above Zhou Xuanji's head. This scene made Beishao Wangjian open his eyes wide. "What's that?" he asked in astonishment. Zhao Congjian brushed past him and said, "The emperor's fate. He was born to be an emperor." Beishao Wangjian was stunned. He was dumbfounded. 3 days later, Zhou Xuanji successfully broke through to inner pellet, and a golden core appeared in his dantian. All the spirit energy in his bones and tendons flowed into the golden core. Sword qi soared into the sky, and the white dragon golden robe fluttered in the wind. Jiang Shui, who was beside him, looked at him with admiration. She waved her little fist and continued to try to break through. Sword owner has broken through to inner pellet. Gacha begins. Ding! Congratulations, the sword owner has obtained, ordinary stone, bookcutter sword, 1000 grade, 2 spirit stones, and 6-path sword shadow body. Zhou Xuanji opened his eyes wide and called out the divine beast's name in his heart. Ordinary stone. Isn't this the lowest grade of God's sword? He immediately took out the bookcutter sword. 3 lines of words appeared before his eyes. Sword name, bookcutter sword grade, common or, description. When a scholar was reading a book, he realized that the most important page was missing. In a fit of rage, he slashed the book with his sword. What a lousy sword. For the first time, Zhou Xuanji had the urge to throw his sword away. He had been looking forward to it for so long. Looking at the bookcutter sword in his hand, he threw it to the ground. Is this a godly sword? It was obviously a dagger. Jiang Shui, who was at the side, couldn't help but open her eyes when she heard a clang. When she saw the bookcutter sword, she realized that it was an unfamiliar sword. She glared at Zhou Xuanji and said, "That was left to you by your mother. How can you throw it away like this?" Zhou Xuanji smiled bitterly. He could only pick up the book-cutter sword and silently store it in the supreme storage. After that, he inherited the memory of the six-path sword shadow. Six-path sword shadow had the profoundness of cloning. It created 6 clones with sword chi, and it was a powerful attack. According to Zhou Xuanji's estimation, six-path sword shadow was at least an Earth-grade advanced tier sword technique. Impressive. The vastness of this memory was second only to the 10,000 sword dragon incantation. After he finished inheriting the memory of the sword technique, he took out the swine-culling sword straightaway and began to practice. Seeing that Zhou Xuanji began to practice, Beixiao Wangjian, Zhao Congjian, and Huang Lianxin were all surprised. Zhou Xuanji did not usually practice the sword, but once he did, it must be a new sword technique. Six-path sword shadow's moves were tricky, and it was divided into 6 positions. After he practiced 100 times, 3 afterimages appeared around him, which made Zhao Congjian and the other two's eyes brighten up. It was a new sword technique indeed. After 300 times, he mastered six-path sword shadow. Zhou Xuanji had 6 sword shadow clones around him, which were exactly the same as him. It was as though he was practicing sword techniques with 7 clones. It was a majestic sight. Zhao Congjian trembled in excitement. He clenched his fists and mumbled, "I want to learn. I want to learn." Beixiao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin were mesmerized by the sight. If they could learn such a sword technique, it would definitely increase their power tremendously. After 500 times, six-path sword shadow produced a sword will. Each sword shadow was imbued with a sword will, which was like 6 legendary swords. They were extremely powerful. Zhou Xuanji leaped up and flew away with the six-path sword shadow. He charged straight into the forest and knocked down the trees one after another. A cloud of dust was swept up as he rampaged for 500 meters. Beixiao Wangjian gritted his teeth and looked back, mumbling, "I can't watch anymore. There are too many sword techniques I want to learn." Huang Lianxin was the same. She could only sigh. Her master's talent was really enviable. The little black snake, who was drinking soup, shook its head and said, "I only have one word for you. I'm convinced." After that, it lowered its head and drank the soup happily. Now, it was untied from the 3-eyed drought rodent because it was already half a meter long. At this rate, it would grow into a giant python sooner or later, and eventually transform into the infamous hegemon-scaled black dragon. In the blink of an eye. Another month passed. Jiang Shui successfully broke through to the enlightening stage, and Huang Lianxin began to break through too. What was most worth celebrating was that Zhao Congjian broke through to the soul fountain stage. This guy challenged Zhou Xuanji in high spirits, but he was defeated by six-path sword shadow. He shut himself out. He continued to train hard. 3 days later, Zhou Xuanji found him and asked him to go to the Great Zhou Empire to take a look. Xiao Jinghong and Meng Tianlang's battle should have ended, but he had not returned yet. He might have encountered some trouble. Zhao Congjian nodded and left immediately. After that, Zhou Xuanji walked up to Beixiao Wangjian and scolded him for being a jinx. Beixiao Wangjian was embarrassed. He could only scratch his head and force a smile. 10 days later, Zhao Congjian came back with a solemn face. The group gathered and asked Xiao Jinghong what happened. "The Meng clan is too much." Zhao Congjian said furiously, "Meng Tianlang could not defeat Xiao Jinghong, and a powerful cultivator from the Meng clan captured Xiao Jinghong. This has caused a huge commotion. Many people in Great Zhou are condemning the Meng clan. Even the Great Zhou's royal court is talking about this, but Emperor Yan of Zhou did not take it to heart. Zhou Xuanji heard him and his face turned cold immediately. Jiang Shui frowned and said, "Is there no royal law in Great Zhou?" Zhao Congjian said softly, "I heard that Zhou Yalong is supporting the Meng clan." Zhou Yalong, the top prodigy of Great Zhou. The person who was most likely to become the next emperor of Great Zhou. Huang Lianxin looked at Zhou Xuanji and asked, "Master, what should we do?" Zhou Xuanji's eyes were flashing with a murderous intent. Flatten the Meng clan and save him. The Meng clan is in the Great Zhou royal city. Are we really going there? This is definitely a trap. Beishao Wangjian reminded. The first person who recognized Zhou Xuanji was Meng Changhu from the Meng clan. The Meng clan was definitely the empress lackey. Zhou Xuanji said, "So what? No matter who it is, I have to save my disciple." Chapter 90. Seeing that Zhou Xuanji was about to act rashly, Zhao Congjian quickly said, "Master, we need to plan this at length. At least before you appear, Xiao Jinghong will be fine." He saw Xiao Jinghong as a competitor and did not wish for Xiao Jinghong to die. Zhou Xuanji frowned and said, "What can we do? We can only sneak into the royal capital and wait for an opportunity." Huang Lianxin suggested, "Brother Zhao, why don't you go and find out more information? Xiao Jinghong is not an ordinary person. Since he was captured by the Meng clan, the Great Zhou Empire will definitely do something. Perhaps Emperor Yan of Zhou has already acted?" The others nodded and felt that this matter couldn't be rushed. Zhou Xuanji was not overwhelmed by anger either. He muttered, "Song Jian, you go first. You must keep a low profile and don't expose your identity." Within Great Zhou, who did not know that Zhao Congjian had become Sword God Zhou's sword slave? The henchmen of the Great Zhou Empress must have been searching for Zhao Congjian's whereabouts. Zhao Congjian nodded and left immediately. After Beishao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin bowed, they left to continue practicing their swordsmanship. They understood that at this moment, Zhou Xuanji needed to remain calm. Moreover, they did not know more about the Great Zhou Empire than Zhou Xuanji. Jiang Shui held Zhou Xuanji's hand and comforted him, "If you really want to go to Great Zhou's royal city, I will go with you. We can disguise ourselves. Recently, I have learned Qin Chitsuan's disguising technique, and I can guarantee that even the gods and immortals will not be able to recognize us." Zhou Xuanji laughed unpleasantly and said, "You said I was boasting, but you like to boast too?" Jiang Shui saw him smile, so she giggled and said, "I learned how to brag from you." Zhou Xuanji patted the back of her hand and said with a smile, "Don't worry, I won't do anything reckless." As he looked at Jiang Shui, Zhou Xuanji suddenly realized that he was as tall as her. Unknowingly, he actually did not notice this matter. He took a deep breath and said, "In recent years, my state of mind has not been good, and I have neglected the people around me." Jiang Shui heard him and felt a little sour in her heart, but she did not show it. She stretched out her hand and patted Zhou Xuanji's head. "Xuanji, you've grown up," she said with a smile. "A man's ambition is to travel far and wide. You are already doing very well." Zhou Xuanji looked back at the top of the hill and said, "It's been a long time since we watched the sunset together. Shall we?" Jiang Shui wrapped her arms around his neck and smiled. "You said it yourself. You're delaying my training." Zhou Xuanji said indifferently, "It's fine to train a little less. Moreover, you don't have to work so hard. I'll take care of you and protect you in the future." Jiang Shui smiled sweetly and did not reply. She sighed in her heart, "I don't want to be your burden. I also want to protect you." The two of them walked towards the top of the hill. Huang Lianxin turned her head and looked at the scene of the two holding hands. She felt a little dazed for some reason. Back then, Jiang Shui was taller than Zhou Xuanji. Back then, it was the older sister who led the younger brother up the mountain. Now, both of them had grown up, and there was no difference in their height. Time really flies. Huang Lianxin muttered to herself. She couldn't help but think of her own matters, falling into a daze. 12 days later. Zhao Congjian returned. He quickly came up to Zhou Xuanji and cupped his fist. Master, things have changed. The Emperor of Great Zhou has made his move. Jiang Shui, Beishao Wangjian, and Huang Lianxin immediately surrounded him. Zhou Xuanji asked, "How is Jinghong? Tell me in detail." Zhao Congjian nodded and told him everything. It turned out that everyone in Great Zhou was unhappy about the sword noble being captured by the Meng clan. The battle between Xiao Jinghong and Meng Tianlang was a gentleman's agreement. As a clan of the empire's generals, the Meng clan was so arrogant and did not deserve their current status. The sword monarch also sent a message to Emperor Yan of Zhou. After Emperor Yan of Zhou knew about the impact of this incident, he could no longer sit still. He immediately dismissed all the generals in the Meng clan and sealed the clan. Xiao Jinghong was invited into the Great Zhou royal palace to meet Emperor Yan of Zhou personally. It was said that Zhou Yalong was severely reprimanded by Emperor Yan of Zhou because of this incident and was strictly forbidden to leave his residence for 3 years. At this point, Zhao Congjian's eyes sparkled and said, "Master, this might be a turning point." Beishao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin became excited too. If Xiao Jinghong told Emperor Yan of Zhou about Zhou Xuanji, would the emperor send someone to bring Zhou Xuanji into the palace? Zhou Xuanji was his biological son after all. Zhou Xuanji glanced at Jiang Shui without leaving a trace. Although she was smiling, she was not excited. He said calmly, "This might be a bigger problem." Although he wanted Emperor Yan of Zhou to see his talent before accepting him again. But that had to be during Great Zhou's heaven selection. In front of the whole world, Emperor Yan of Zhou must protect him. But now, Xiao Jinghong was meeting Emperor Yan of Zhou in private. Even the Empress of Great Zhou could track him down. If Emperor Yan of Zhou wanted to, he could surely find Zhou Xuanji earlier. That's right. The emperor's clan is not particular about relationships. Emperor Yan of Zhou is about to ascend, and Zhou Yalong is already mature. Even if Master's talent is revealed, the gap between you and Zhou Yalong is too great. Not only in terms of cultivation, but also in terms of connections in the royal court. The little black snake twisted its body as it walked over. Its tongue flicked in and out, which made everyone shudder. Zhao Congjian said, "No matter what, Xiao Jinghong is temporarily out of danger. Everyone knows that Emperor Yan of Zhou cherishes talents. With Xiao Jinghong's talent, Emperor Yan of Zhou might take a liking to him." Zhou Xuanji rubbed his chin and fell into deep thought. He did not want to go to Great Zhou to become the emperor. He only wanted to kill the empress and leave Great Zhou. Now that Xiao Jinghong was captured, his plan was completely messed up. If an empire has a monarchical violet qi, it can rise up powerfully, and its fate will last for thousands of years. But if there are 2 monarchical violet qi, the empire might be destroyed. At this moment, an old voice came. Everyone turned around and saw a silhouette standing at the top of the hill. He had a hunched back and was holding a walking stick. His white hair was tied behind his head, and his eyes were squinted. There were many yellow spots on his face, and he was dressed like an old man in the countryside. Zhao Congjian drew his sword and asked with a deep voice, "Who are you?" The old man ignored him and looked at Zhou Xuanji with a smile. Zhou Yalong was born with monarchical violet qi and was nurtured by Emperor Yan of Zhou as the heir to the throne. After that, Zhou Yalong became a powerful cultivator. I did not expect you to be born at this time. You also have monarchical violet qi, which put the current emperor in a difficult position. Monarchical violet qi? Zhou Xuanji frowned. What's that? He suddenly remembered that the race in his attribute list was not human but Great Zhou's royal bloodline. The old man walked down the hill slowly. As he walked, he said casually, if it were 500 years earlier, Emperor Yan of Zhou might have made arrangements for the two of you. But now, only one of you can live, and it must be before he ascends. This is your destiny with Zhou Yalong. Zhou Xuanji raised his hand slightly, and the Hell King sword and Thunderclap sword appeared in his hands. He asked with squinted eyes, if you don't tell us who you are, don't blame us for being impolite. This person appeared nearby without anyone noticing and even said these words. He did not come with good intentions. Chapter 91. Seeing that Zhou Xuanji was about to fight, the old man waved his hand with a smile and said, "Don't worry. I will not harm you. I'm your grand teacher." Grand teacher? Zhou Xuanji was stunned. Jiang Shui, Zhao Congjian, and the others were stunned too. The little black snake hid behind a rock and mumbled to himself, such a horrifying aura. I hope he won't be interested in my flesh. Zhou Xuanji asked with a frown, you mean, you are my mother's teacher? As for Emperor Yan of Zhou? He was someone who stood at the top of the northern wilderness region. His teacher had either ascended or died. The old man nodded and smiled as he stroked his long beard. The world calls me Daoya old man. I raised your mother. Back then, I said that Emperor Yan of Zhou was not a good person. It's a pity that your mother fell into a tribulation of love and could not extricate herself from it. In the end, she died. He said it casually, as though he did not feel heartache over his beloved disciple's death. Zhao Congjian's expression changed and said, Daoya old man. The legendary land god. I didn't expect him to really exist. To be called a land god, one must have lived for thousands of years, or even tens of thousands of years. Zhou Xuanji's brows did not relax but asked, back then, when my mother was in trouble, why did you not help? Daoya old man stepped forward and came up to Zhou Xuanji as though he teleported. His right hand landed on Zhou Xuanji's shoulder. Zhou Xuanji wanted to step back instinctively, but he realized that he could not move. The others took out their weapons and were ready to fight. Not bad. You are much more talented than your mother. Daoya old man smiled satisfactorily and answered Zhou Xuanji's question, I'm not a real god who can save your mother anytime. Everyone has their own fate, and I cannot interfere. Your mother's fate is all on you. Back then, when your mother was pregnant with you, I knew that heaven would not tolerate you, but your mother insisted on giving birth to you. I could only use a special spell to conceal the heavenly will and ensure your survival. Zhou Xuanji's pupils dilated, and he looked shocked. The others were shocked too. Heaven would not tolerate? No wonder Zhou Xuanji was so devilish. Daoya old man took back his hand and said, your mother replaced you. If heaven wanted her dead, she had to die. The Empress of Great Zhou was her fate. Zhou Xuanji was displeased and asked, you make it sound so mystical. If there really is a heavenly law, then as long as I'm powerful enough, can I go down to the netherworld to find my mother? Resurrect her? Jiang Shui and the others were also stunned by Daoya old man's words. Was there really heaven's will in the unseen world? If that was the case, was there really any meaning in their efforts to change themselves? Daoya old man nodded and smiled. There is no limit to how strong he is. Maybe it really is possible. Zhou Xuanji took a deep breath and asked, what's the use of monarchical violet qi? It's useless. It's just a type of fate. He's only suitable to be an emperor. His luck is far thicker than normal people's. When two emperors' purple qi collide, only one can survive. When you see Zhou Yalong, you will understand. Daoya old man chuckled and looked at Jiang Shui meaningfully. Jiang Shui blushed and quickly lowered her head. Facing Zhou Xuanji's grand teacher, she was very nervous, shy, and perturbed. She had an indescribable complex feeling. Marriage bestowed by the heavens. Not bad, not bad. Daoya old man laughed, and Jiang Shuai raised her head in surprise. Zhou Xuanji curled his lip. He suddenly felt that Daoya old man might have been talking nonsense. However, he also felt that Daoya old man meant no harm. Cultivate well. I will go to the great Zhou royal palace on your behalf. No one can help you in your fated battle with Zhou Yalong. Daoya old man looked at Zhou Xuanji and nodded with a smile. His tone was filled with encouragement. After that, he disappeared on the spot. Huang Lianxin sighed in amazement, he's really an old immortal. Beixiao Wangjian curled his lip and said, since he's Master's grand teacher, why doesn't he help Master? Zhao Congjian glanced at him and said, it's not that he doesn't want to help. He has already helped a lot. But a powerful cultivator can only rely on himself. Master doesn't want him to help either. Zhou Xuanji looked calm and nodded slightly. What the? Who doesn't want him to help? Shortly after, he waved his hand and said, continue your cultivation. We will surely go to the great Zhou royal city. Whether it's the will of the heavens or not, a life for a life. The Empress of Great Zhou must die. His tone was resolute. In his opinion, if he killed the Empress of the Great Zhou, it was her fate. The group nodded and dispersed. Zhou Xuanji walked up the hill and sat facing the sun to internalize qi. Inner pellet was far from enough. Zhou Yalong had lived for hundreds of years. His cultivation had already surpassed the astral infant stage. He must become more powerful. The little black snake came to his back. It raised its body and looked afar. I have lived for more than 1,000 years. Let me give you a piece of advice. It said. Smack! Zhou Xuanji slapped it down the cliff. Trying to act cool in front of me? The little black snake fell 100 meters and smashed into the rocks. You! Let me finish. It wailed. It cursed in its heart and even felt wronged. Can't you give me some dignity? I was a 5th-rank demon king after all. What will of the heavens? I only believe that man can conquer nature. Zhou Xuanji snorted. There was something else that he said in his heart, it's not like I haven't died before. I was mediocre in my previous life, but in this life, I will be more glorious than the heavens. Time always passed very quickly during cultivation. A month later, Daoya old man returned. However, he did not bring Xiao Jinghong back. Zhou Xuanji walked down the mountain and came up to him. What did you do? He asked. Daoya old man chuckled, I brought your disciple back. Where's my disciple? I, your grand teacher, failed. Can't you tell? Then why are you smiling so confidently? He's not my disciple. Why should I cry? Zhou Xuanji sighed. In his memory, Lady Zhao Xian was gentle and virtuous. How did she endure Daoya old man? Daoya old man smiled, Grand disciple, let me tell you a piece of good news. Zhou Xuanji asked expressionlessly, speak. Daoya old man smiled proudly, your grand teacher has great influence. I was so angry that Emperor Yan of Zhou gave Xiao Jinghong to the Sword Monarch. If you want to find Xiao Jinghong, ask the Sword Monarch for him. Grand teacher, can I hammer you to death? Zhou Xuanji asked with a smile. He almost took out the chicken-slaying sword. Forget it. Now, other than Zhou Yalong and the Empress, his opponents were the Sword Monarch. Daoya old man rubbed Zhou Xuanji's head and said, I have another piece of good news. Zhou Xuanji flipped his right hand, and the chicken-slaying sword appeared in his hand. The tip of the sword pointed downward involuntarily. On the way back, I went to look for the Sword Monarch. He's still very influential. The sword monarch was so angry that he said that if you want Xiao Jinghong, you must defeat him personally. Daoya old man said with a smile. As he spoke, he twisted his waist backward and dodged the chicken-slaying sword by a hair's breadth. Jiang Shui, Zhao Congjian, and the others stood nearby and listened in silence. They thought that Daoya old man's arrival could turn the tables, but he pushed them into the abyss instead. Maybe this is what Zhou Xuanji always talks about as a useless teammate. Jiang Shui mumbled. Zhao Congjian and the others nodded and did not know what to say. Daoya old man squatted down and pinched the chicken-slaying sword's blade with his right thumb and index finger. I have another piece of good news, he chuckled. The Hell King sword appeared in Zhou Xuanji's left hand. He activated Hell King possession straightaway. Daoya old man did not panic at all. Have you heard of the 9 emperors of the sword's way? Even the sword monarch was worlds apart from them. I have the inheritance of one of the emperors. How about I give it to you? Chapter 92. 9 Emperors of the Way of the Sword? Zhou Xuanji deactivated the Hell King's possession and looked curious. He and Jiang Shui had heard Qiu Beili mention the 9 emperors of the Way of the Sword. Since ancient times, they were the 9 strongest sword emperors in the Sword Dao. They were legends in the hearts of countless sword cultivators. Zhao Congjian, Beishao Wangjian, and Huang Lianxin had also heard of the legend of the 9 emperors of the Way of the Sword. What do you think? It was good news, right? Do you want it? Daoya old man asked with a smile, like an old man trying to trick a little girl. Zhao Congjian said in disdain, my master, shut up. Zhou Xuanji turned around and stared at him. Zhao Congjian felt wronged and could only remain silent. Zhou Xuanji looked at Daoya old man and asked, where is the inheritance? At the same time, he asked the sword spirit in his heart if he could accept the sword emperor's inheritance. Of course you can. As long as it's about the sword Dao, sword master can become stronger without any worries. The supreme legendary sword system will help sword master continue on his path. The sword spirit replied quickly, which made Zhou Xuanji very satisfied. He was afraid that the system would place too many restrictions on him. However, the supreme legendary sword system was not bad. It was very open-ended, and it only had one rule: he could only walk the path of the sword. Daoya old man flipped his right hand, and a small golden sword appeared in his palm. Send your divine sense into it and you can start the inheritance test. You only have one chance. If you don't pass the test, the sword will turn into dust. So, you have to be prepared. Hearing Daoya old man's reminder, Zhou Xuanji took the sword. The others gathered around and looked at the small golden sword curiously. Daoya old man turned around, waved his hand, and said with a smile, I'm leaving. Grand disciple, I'll wait for you to defeat the sword monarch of Great Zhou and become famous in the northern wilderness region. Don't worry about me, I'm living a carefree life. He walked elegantly, like an immortal traveling the mortal world. However, he did not receive a reply. Zhou Xuanji and the others focused their attention on the small golden sword. After walking for 100 meters, he looked back. Sigh. He sighed and disappeared on the spot. Thank you, Zhou Xuanji looked up and said softly, looking at where he had left. Zhao Congjian could not help but ask, Master, are you really going to inherit the legacy of the ancient sword emperors? With your talent, you will definitely be in existence on the same level as the 9 emperors of the Way of the Sword in 1,000 years. Zhou Xuanji looked up at him and sighed. From the sword, bend over. Zhou Xuanji said softly. Zhao Congjian was confused, but he still lowered his head obediently. Jiang Shui, Beishao Wangjian, and Huang Lianxin were all curious. Zhou Xuanji stretched out his hand and rubbed the back of Zhao Congjian's head. Congjian, you are good at everything, except that you are stubborn. Humans are humans because they know how to be flexible. He sighed. I did say that everyone has their own way of the sword, but gathering the strengths of 100 schools of thought is also the way to forge one's own way of the sword. Of course, this requires an extremely strong mental fortitude, and one must maintain their original heart. You must grasp this point well. Zhao Zongjian was deep in thought. Northern Valiant Sword and Huang Lianxin were also thinking about this. The little black snake at the side rolled its eyes and thought to itself, I really believe your nonsense. Jiang Shui pulled Zhou Xuanji's clothes and reminded him, Xuanji, you only have one chance. You must be careful. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, don't worry. I know what I'm doing. The sword monarch of Great Zhou values Jinghong a lot. Together with the sword monarch's great reputation, he will not harm Jinghong. We don't have to rush to save him. The reason why there was no rush was because he was not powerful enough. He looked down at the small golden sword in his hand and fell into deep thought. Zhao Zongjian got up and left. He kept mumbling to himself, maintain your original heart. Maintain your original heart. All these years, under Zhou Xuanji's guidance, he had never taken the wrong path. His progress in the sword's way was very smooth, so he would seriously consider every word that Zhou Xuanji taught him. Northern Valiant Sword and Huang Lianxin left separately and continued their sword training. Jiang Shui did not disturb Zhou Xuanji but returned to the mountain to internalize qi and cultivate. 3 months later, Zhou Xuanji broke through to inner pellet level 2. That night, he took out the small golden sword and prepared to receive the inheritance. He gathered Jiang Shui and the rest so that no one would disturb him. When he probed into the small golden sword with his mind. Boom! Something exploded in his mind. When he opened his eyes again, he realized that he was standing high up in the sky. The blue sky was above his head, and beneath his feet was a sea of clouds. He was shocked and felt that there was an invisible floor beneath his feet. Could it be an illusion? At this moment, a black shadow appeared in front of him. It was hundreds of meters tall, like a mountain. The black shadow only had a silhouette and could not be seen clearly. I am the Sky-Sundering Sword Emperor, Wang Xiaofei. Junior, if you wish to obtain my inheritance, you must pass my test. His voice was domineering like that of a god. Even Zhou Xuanji could not help but worship him. Sky-Sundering Sword Emperor? What a chinibu! Zhou Xuanji ridiculed in his heart, but on the surface, he looked expectant. No matter how bad the 9 emperors of the Way of the Sword were, they should at least have heaven-grade sword techniques, right? The first test is to fight someone of a higher level. Your cultivation is at the 2nd level of the inner Dan stage. You need to defeat a soul swordsman at the 2nd level of the spirit spring stage. Do you dare to accept? Wang Xiaofei asked, and Zhou Xuanji replied without hesitation, come. Then, a black shadow of a swordsman appeared in front of him. He was 1.8 meters tall and was far less intimidating than Wang Xiaofei's shadow. Zhou Xuanji took out the thunderclap sword and used the 8-step sword lunge, coming up to the soul swordsman. 6 afterimages appeared around Zhou Xuanji. It was the 6-path sword shadow body. Zhou Xuanji stabbed toward the soul swordsman, and so did the 6-path sword shadow. Boom! The soul swordsman perished. Before it could even attack, it was defeated by Zhou Xuanji in an instant. Zhou Xuanji had cultivated the Sword Qi Golden Body incantation to the 3rd level, Sword Qi Soar. Both his physical strength and Sword Qi were powerful. Together with the gold-grade legendary swords, how could a Soul Fountain level 2 not be destroyed? The second test is a Soul Swordsman at the 5th level of the Spirit Spring stage. Do you dare to accept? Wang Xiaofei continued to ask. His tone was emotionless, as though he was unconscious. Fight. Just when Zhou Xuanji spoke, the Soul Swordsman appeared. He waved his right hand, and numerous legendary swords appeared above his head. He charged at the Soul Swordsman with the 10 swords mode. 10 legendary swords flew toward the Soul Swordsman like bolts of lightning. The Soul Swordsman swung its sword to block, but it could not withstand the impact of 10 legendary swords. It immediately jumped away. Swoosh! The Ghost Curse sword pierced through the Soul Swordsman with the ranged sword propelling. It was destroyed again. Zhou Xuanji frowned and mumbled, "Too weak. It's like fighting a robot." If the Soul Swordsman was a real person, he would be even more powerful. The third test. Within 3 days, cultivate an Earth-grade low-tier sword technique to small accomplishment. Wang Xiaofei's voice came again. Next, an ancient book appeared in front of Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji stored his swords and flipped through the ancient book. He memorized all the sword moves and threw the book aside. He was extremely confident. Moonlight Wind Sword Dance. He took out the book-cutter sword and began practicing. There were a total of 108 sword moves. He used 10 breaths time to complete one round, which was extremely fast. After all, he had already mastered many sword techniques. Many of the sword moves were similar, so it was easy for him to use them. After 100 rounds, the Moonlight Wind Sword Dance reached small accomplishment. After 300 rounds, the Moonlight Wind Sword Dance reached great accomplishment. After 500 rounds, the Moonlight Wind Sword Dance reached Sword Will. Zhou Xuanji stored his swords. He was a little dissatisfied and shook his head, saying, "An hour is still too slow." He looked at Wang Xiaofei and prepared for the next test. However, the Sky-Sundering Sword Emperor, Wang Xiaofei, did not continue with the next test. A long while later. "Brat, you are King cheating." Wang Xiaofei cursed suddenly, which stunned Zhou Xuanji. "Ugh, this thing has consciousness?" Chapter 93. Have you practiced this sword technique before? Deliberately putting on an act? Wang Xiaofei's 100-meter-tall shadow asked, his tone somewhat angry. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow and said, "This is my first time seeing this sword technique. I don't believe it. No one can cultivate an Earth-grade sword art sword intent in such a short time." Wang Xiaofei said in a low voice. Judging from his tone, he was ready to end the inheritance test at any time. Zhou Xuanji said impatiently, "If you don't believe me, take out another sword technique. How dare you question me? The supreme legendary sword system that I designed is just that overpowered." Another ancient book appeared before Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji took it and flipped through it. He realized that this sword technique was even more difficult than the Moonlight Wind Dance sword dance. It wasn't just a little difficult. Soul Eater Slash. The name sounded awesome, but who knew what kind of power it would have once it was mastered. He took out the swine-culling sword and began to practice. The first time, he spent 20 breaths of time. The second time only took 10 breaths of time. After repeating it 100 times, the Soul Eater Slash had reached the small success stage. After 300 repetitions, the Soul Eater Slash was completed. After 500 repetitions, the Soul Eater Slash achieved sword intent. Zhou Xuanji sheathed his sword and was pleasantly surprised. If this sword technique was used by the Ghost Curse sword, it would simply be able to kill gods and demons. The lethality was too great. He pretended to be expressionless and said, "What do you say?" Wang Xiaofei was silent. Zhou Xuanji stared at him and said, "You don't want to admit it?" Wang Xiaofei's tone was complicated as he said, "Which almighty being are you the reincarnation of?" Zhou Xuanji replied, "I'm from the sanctum of China. My name is Sword God Zhou." Sword God? This level of comprehension is indeed godly. Wang Xiaofei said faintly. Then, he changed the topic and said, forget about the remaining dozens of rounds, you passed the assessment directly. Dozens of stages? Zhou Xuanji opened his eyes wide. So cunning. If this went on, who could stand it? You have two choices. One is the Emperor's sword that I left behind, and the other is a sword technique that I left behind, Wang Xiaofei continued. Zhou Xuanji frowned and asked, you're one of the 9 emperors of the Way of the Sword, why are you so petty? Wang Xiaofei coldly snorted and proudly said, no matter which one I choose, I will be able to move unhindered in the world. Zhou Xuanji thought for a while and decided to take the sword. No matter how strong a sword technique was, it still required spiritual energy as a foundation. King Sword. If it was a good sword, he could even fuse it with his legendary sword. It might even be able to give birth to an amethyst divine sword. Of course, it could also be used alone. When you get out, the Emperor's sword will appear in your hand. Alright, the inheritance is over. Wang Xiaofei's tone became cold again. Zhou Xuanji blinked and asked curiously, I really want to know, are you dead or alive? Humph. Wang Xiaofei waved his hand, and next, Zhou Xuanji felt everything around him shatter. As if he had awoken from a dream, he opened his eyes and saw Jiang Shui's face, causing him to tremble in fear. He called out, what are you doing? Zhao Congjian, Beishao Wangjian, and Huang Lianxin turned around. Jiang Shui was also frightened. She clutched her chest and curled her lips. Just look at you. Is there a need to be so exaggerated? Zhou Xuanji rolled his eyes. Getting so close would scare him to death. Zhao Congjian quickly asked, so fast? Did Master fail? Zhou Xuanji stared at him and said, are you looking down on me, your master? He told them about the process of the test, and everyone sighed in amazement. Dozens of stages? What a scam! Beishao Wangjian asked curiously, Master, where's the Emperor's sword? Take it out and let us see. Oh yeah. Where's the Emperor's sword? Zhou Xuanji looked down and saw that the small golden sword in his hand was not the Emperor's sword. That old man lied to me? Zhou Xuanji frowned. At this moment, the small golden sword suddenly exploded into countless golden specks of light. The specks of light quickly formed into a giant sword that was 1.5 meters long. The sword was entirely golden, and its blade was 30 centimeters wide. 2 golden dragons coiled around the hilt, which looked extremely majestic. So this is the Emperor's sword? It weighs 5,000 kilograms. Zhou Xuanji mumbled to himself. If not for his powerful body, he might have been smashed into meat paste. When the others heard this, they all reached out and shook hands. Jiang Shui and Huang Lianxin could not even lift it up. Zhao Congjian had it easy, but Beishao Wangjian was struggling. Sword Spirit, what grade is this sword? Zhou Xuanji asked curiously in his heart. The Emperor's sword of the Sky-Sundering Sword Emperor should be more than gold grade, right? The Sword Spirit needs to examine it. Do you want to keep it in the Supreme Legendary Sword System? Keep it. As Zhou Xuanji spoke, the Emperor's sword disappeared. Zhao Congjian curled his lip and said, this inheritance is a little shabby. It seems like the 9 emperors of the sword's way are nothing more than this. Huang Lianxin guessed, maybe the period when he established the inheritance was not when he was at his peak, or maybe he just wanted to help his descendants and not really let someone inherit his legacy. The little black snake came over and said disdainfully, a man who is never content is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. 2 Earth-grade sword techniques and a Sword Emperor's sword, what else do you want? Beishao Wangjian said, Lianxin, let's starve it for 7 days. Huang Lianxin nodded, okay. The little black snake became anxious. Aren't you too stingy? Great Zhou's royal city, in an ancient-looking inn. A storyteller stood at the center of the first floor, surrounded by close to 100 people. He waved his folding fan and said with his eyes wide open, facing the threat of Tai Yulong and the other royal soldiers, "Sword God Zhou slashed with his sword." The sword's radiance illuminated the heavens and the earth. That scene could not be described with words. Hundreds of thousands of people in Wuxia city sighed in admiration. A sword of a god. I heard that sword god Zhou killed Tai Yulong and the others in an instant. He even slashed down a mountain and almost sank Wuxia city. The audience cried out in astonishment. Their faces were filled with admiration. At this moment, a voice came from the corner of the inn, "Mister, who do you think is more powerful, Sword God Zhou or the Sword Monarch?" The storyteller stroked his goatee and pretended to be profound. Actually, Sword God Zhou and the Sword Monarch had a battle before. With this, everyone opened their eyes wide. Are you serious? How come I have never heard of it? A muscular man held a bowl of wine and questioned. The storyteller said with a smile, "It's true. I saw it with my own eyes." They fought to a draw and admired each other. The Sword Monarch said that once Sword God Zhou appears in the world, he will be famous. As expected, Sword God Zhou became the first person on the reputation ranking of Great Zhou this year. Even the sword noble Xiao Jinghong said that he was Sword God Zhou's disciple. The unparalleled Sword God Zhou, he truly lives up to his name. The crowd clapped and cheered as they listened to Sword God Zhou's stories. They all felt excited, as if they were Sword God Zhou themselves. Nonsense. Sword God Zhou is still far from the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou. He can't even be compared to the Sword Monarch's disciple. The voice came from the corner of the inn again. It was full of disdain. This time, he incurred the wrath of the crowd. Everyone turned to look, but in the next moment, their expressions changed. They all knelt down and did not dare to look at that person again. The storyteller was also shocked. He quickly knelt down and said with a trembling voice, "Your Highness." The person who spoke was the crown prince of the Great Zhou Empire, Zhou Tianyu. Zhou Tianyu looked like he was in his early 30s. He had a dignified face and a calm temperament. He wore a white shirt. The innkeeper was also shocked. He quickly ran over and asked with a stutter, "Your Highness, why are you here?" Zhou Tianyu drank a bowl of wine and said expressionlessly, "I passed by this inn and heard that someone was praising Sword God Zhou and belittling the Sword Monarch. So I came in to take a look." After that, he got up and walked towards the side door of the inn. When he reached the door, he suddenly stopped. With his back facing everyone in the inn, he said, "Sword God Zhou can't even protect his own disciple. He's not a hero. If he dares to challenge the Sword Monarch, I, Zhou Tianyu, am willing to take him as my teacher and let him be the Crown Prince's teacher. You can spread the word. I don't think he dares to." You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.